I'm James Rosone.
And I'm Miranda Watson. We're the husband and wife writing team that created the military thriller Monroe Doctrine series and the military sci-fi series The Rise of the Republic.
We have some additional content we'd like to share with you guys today, and we hope you'll find it informative and entertaining. We're planning to create more videos similar to this in the future.
As always, please like, share, and subscribe. Now let's get started.
Chapter 10. Dynamic Raid. October 26th, 2020, Kosovo. Brigadier General William Lancaster and Lieutenant Colonel Seth Mitchell watched the video feed coming in from the MQ-9A Reaper drone as it loitered 10,000 feet above the small village of Srbica, which was situated 52 kilometers away from their current position. The camera zoomed in, providing them a good overwatch of the mosque and the two houses they were observing nearby. On a different monitor was another video feed being transmitted to them by a pair of intelligence assets hidden nearby. Another team was set up in a house several hundred meters away with a set of parabolic microphones aimed at the two houses they were monitoring and the mosque. It was only a matter of time until the person they were after showed up, and then the capture team would be sent in. A few hundred meters away from the room where they were watching all the feeds was a pair of Black Hawk helicopters with a Delta Force team ready to roll, the helicopter blades rotating slowly as the engine idled in anticipation of a quick launch order. Further down the flight line were two Ospreys on standby, with two ODA teams on alert should the initial capture team run into heavy resistance and call for help. The ODA teams weren't happy about being sidelined in place of Delta, but they had been overridden by the JSOC commander. "There!" shouted one of the soldiers excitedly as he pointed at a Mercedes-Benz that was approaching their observation zone. Turning to look at the soldier, General Lancaster asked, "Are you sure? Do we have confirmation that he's in the car?" Nodding his head, the soldier removed one of his earphones. He had been listening in on the information being provided to him from the NSA. "Yes, the NSA has given 97% voice match to the target. He's actively using his phone in the car. That's how they confirmed it's him." Standing now, the general walked over to the young man. "I want to know who he's talking to, and I want the location of the caller on the other end," he demanded. The soldier nodded and passed the order over the headset to the NSA operators on the other end. The analyst back at Fort Meade would set to work tracking down the person on the other end. "Should we launch the capture team?" asked the Delta Force squadron leader, a lieutenant colonel who had accompanied his troops to Kosovo. Shaking his head, Lancaster replied, "No, not yet. I want to know who Rajepi is talking to first. Pipe the conversation through to us as soon as we have it." The general took up station next to the soldier who was coordinating things with the NSA. A second later, the soldier hit a few keys on his keyboard, and they heard the conversation being played out over the speakers. Voice A: "You need to go to ground. The Americans will be all over you." Voice B: "No, there is still too much to do. I can't just disappear. Not yet." "You don't understand. They've captured one of your team members. If he hasn't given you up yet, he will soon." "No, they didn't. I read in all the news reports. They were all killed in a police shootout during their missions." "That's what they wanted us to think. My source says one of them is still alive and being interrogated. He's not dead. They lied." "Crap. Are you sure?" "Yes. Go to Plan B and disappear. The monies have been moved and are ready for your other team." "Fine. I'll head to the alternate site and disappear. How will I get in touch with you again?" "You won't. We'll reach out to you when we need your services again. Just make sure your other team executes their next attack. When they do, then I'll transmit the final wire transfer." Click. They all turned their attention to the video feed. The Mercedes was now parked in front of one of the houses they had under surveillance. When the man got out of the back seat, one of the other observation teams used their telescopic lens to zoom in and snap a number of images of his face and the faces of the other two men who were traveling with him. In seconds, those images were transmitted to the U.S. to be run through their sophisticated facial recognition software. They wanted to get a confirmation on his facial image in addition to his voice before they executed the raid. A second later, one of the captains who had been coordinating that part of the operation with their back-end support nodded to the general. "It's a match. That's Rajepi. The other 2 men are his bodyguards." With both voice and visual confirmation of the target, General Lancaster nodded to the JSOC colonel. "Get your boys in the air and go fetch me Rajepi," he ordered. "Tell the interrogation team to stand by. We should have him in custody and ready for questioning within the next 60 minutes. With the green light given, a flurry of activity started as the whole mission moved forward. The sound of helicopter blades picked up in speed, the noise reverberating through the walls of the building. It was now a matter of waiting until the capture team arrived on station and executed the snatch and grab. "It's incredible to watch, isn't it?" The general overheard Seth ask the newly appointed director of the Kosovo police and the new head of the security service. The 2 men had been observing the controlled chaos with a look of bewilderment. A special exception had been made to allow these 2 men to observe the mission. The Sachs administration desperately needed to keep the Kosovo government on their side so they could continue to execute these capture missions inside Kosovo, and soon in the surrounding countries. The U.S. didn't have a lot of allies in Western Europe these days, so keeping the Kosovars on their side was important. The easiest way to do that was to make them a fully vested partner. The Sachs administration would essentially eradicate the Islamic extremist problem inside Kosovo, and in exchange, the government would turn a blind eye to the fact that many of these individuals being captured or killed were their own citizens. The police director remarked, "It's like watching something out of a James Bond movie. I still can't believe you were able to listen in on Rajepi's phone conversation like that." The new security service chief snickered. "To think the Serbs actually thought they could stand up to America 2 decades ago during the war. If they knew half of the capabilities you guys had before the start of the war, I think they would have walked away from Kosovo, and we wouldn't have suffered the ethnic cleansing we did." He shook his head. Seth nodded. "The tricky part is coming up next. The actual grab is probably the riskiest part of the mission." For the next 15 minutes, they watched and waited as the Black Hawks sped toward the house. In short order, the choppers came into view of the drone, which had zoomed back out to provide them with a much wider view of the surrounding area. As the sound of the rotating blades drew near, some of the men guarding the house came outside to check on things. A couple of the intelligence assets on the ground saw what was going on and sent a quick message to the men in the helicopters, letting them know of the potential threats. Neither of the guards appeared to be armed, but that didn't mean they didn't have quick access to a weapon. Suddenly, one of the men pointed at the approaching choppers. They would obviously recognize that these were not Kosovo police helicopters, but American military helicopters instead. The 2 men ran inside the building. The Blackhawks raced to get into position to offload the capture team. The first helicopter flew a quick pass over the 2 houses near the mosque before banking hard to the left and pulling up hard on the nose to bleed off speed. As the first chopper leveled off, the second helicopter got to within 25 meters of the 2 houses and hovered over the street in front of the buildings. A pair of ropes were thrown out of the door, men rapidly sliding down them to get on the ground. Once the figures were on the ground, they moved with lightning speed as the other helicopter dropped its own ropes on the roof of the targeted building. 4 soldiers descended from the other helicopter onto the roof. From their vantage point in the observation deck, General Lancaster and the other observers could watch the footage from the body cameras as the Delta Force's men quickly moved to breach the top of the building and gain entry. The other 8 soldiers on the ground moved rapidly to the front of the building. 4 soldiers broke off from the group and headed toward the rear of the 2 houses. Suddenly, 2 men emerged from the front of the house, weapons in their hands. Before either of them could even raise their weapons to fire at the SF soldiers, the operators fired a quick series of shots, taking them both out. Seconds later, the 4 soldiers charging the front of the house positioned themselves next to the front structure. Two of the soldiers began throwing flashbangs into the first-floor rooms. Then one of the other soldiers breached the front door, and the group rushed inside. The Delta operators moved rapidly, clearing each room, either killing the individuals they encountered or throwing them to the ground and rapidly zip-tying them. The second group of operators that busted through the back of the house quickly cleared their portion of the house, while the other 4 who landed on the roof worked their way down the 3-story structure until they had the entire house secured. One of the operators radioed in. "Regepi's in custody. We have one of his bodyguards in custody and 3 others killed in action. We'll get the biometrics on the KIAs and send them back to you shortly. We're going to conduct a quick grab of any SSC we can find and get out here. How copy?" asked the team leader. General Lancaster turned and headed toward the Kosovo Police and Security Service chiefs. "Sirs, we just grabbed the primary target. We know the neighboring house and the mosque are also part of this group. Can we have your permission to search these 2 buildings before the team needs to return and before the locals living in the village have a chance to react to what just happened?" The 2 Kosovars looked at each other and just shrugged. "I don't think it'd be a problem, but I'd do it quickly. It won't take long for the people who support Regepi to figure out what just went down." The general turned to the squadron commander. "Tell your guys to hit the other 2 locations and look for any potential SSC that might be helpful. They know what to look for. Tell them they have 10 mics to see what they can find and get the hell out of there." The lieutenant colonel nodded and picked up the radio handset. He relayed the order, and the group collectively watched as the operators moved rapidly to the other 2 buildings. The 12-man team broke into 2 teams of 5, while 2 of the soldiers stayed with Regepi and his bodyguard, who were both laying hogtied on the ground in a field between the mosque and the 2 houses. Several large black trash bags of goodies also lay on the ground next to them, the contents of the house that had been identified as having potential intelligence value. With the immediate target apprehended, Seth walked over to the captain coordinating things with their back-end support. "Does the NSA have a fix on who Regepi was talking to yet?" he asked. The captain turned to Seth and nodded. "They do. It's a cell phone. They're still tracking down who it is. The person may be in the known voice recognition database, but even if he isn't, we got a location. The call originated in Skopje, Macedonia. Here's the location." The captain pulled up a map of the city. The lines in Seth's forehead deepened as he squinted. "Is it me? Or does that look like a bank?" he asked. Looking at the image, the captain responded, "You're right. Huh. Yeah, it's the Silk Road Bank of Macedonia." Seth waved General Lancaster over. "Sir, I think you need to look at this," he said. "What do you guys have?" asked Lancaster. "The person Regepi was talking to," Seth responded. "The NSA tracked the cell phone down to someone in this building, the Silk Road Bank of Macedonia. Whoever else is involved in this conspiracy clearly works at the bank, sir, or is inside doing some business there. How do you want us to handle this? Do we send an ODA team we have on standby after them and scoop up the other person involved with Regepi?" General Lancaster lifted his head up and looked at the back wall for a moment, clearly considering his options. Seth was glad he didn't have to be the one to make the call on this. The potential political fallout from ordering this type of operation at a bank was definitely a consideration. Then again, if they didn't do it now, and he somehow slipped away, they might never know who else was involved in this dastardly attack on their country. After a pause, Lancaster ordered, "Get the drone headed that way. I want real-time surveillance on that bank. See if the NSA can keep a lock on that phone. If someone starts to leave that bank and the phone is on them, tell the NSA to keep tracking its movement." Turning to look at his JSOC commander, the general continued, "Tell your boys to pack up what they have and get back to base. Order the ODA team to spin up and get in the air and start heading to Skopje. I'm going to place a quick call to the defense attaché's office in Skopje and let them know what we've found and what we're planning on doing." Seth found the defense attaché phone number for the general. He hit dial and handed the phone over to Lancaster, who immediately grabbed it and waited for the senior defense official in Macedonia to pick up. Seth knew that the colonel over there had been briefed on what was going on in Kosovo and knew ahead of time that operations might spill over into Macedonia. He had already briefed the Macedonian officials on the possibility, and they had been all too eager to let the Americans handle their Islamic extremist problem for them. Truthfully, there was no love lost between the Macedonian government and their minority ethnic Albanian population. When the colonel in Macedonia picked up, General Lancaster relayed what had transpired with Recepi and how the person he was talking to was currently in Skopje. He told him an ODA team was on its way to Skopje, and once it looked like they could reasonably execute the grab, they would. When the general got off the phone, he told Seth, the colonel asked to be able to loop in his counterparts at the Ministry of Defense and to let the ambassador there know about the operation. They'd probably like to avoid some big shooting incident with the U.S. forces in the capital city. Macedonia is friendly to America, but they are trying to become a part of the EU, and the optics of that wouldn't go over the best with the Europeans. The next 20 minutes went by in a blur, as phone calls between Bonsteel, SOCOM HQ in Tampa, the Pentagon, and the embassy in Skopje took place, as the decision to send the ODA team in was weighed against the public perception and the possible reaction of such a raid. While all of this was happening, the captain who was monitoring the situation with the NSA interrupted everyone. "Sir, the NSA says the phone is moving," he announced. All eyes then looked at the drone feed. The Reaper had finally come on station a few thousand feet above the city and had zoomed in on the Silk Road bank of Macedonia. They watched a man leave the bank and head toward a row of parked cars nearby. "Is that the man?" demanded the general as they watched the lone figure walking down the sidewalk. The captain spoke into the phone and everything went silent for a second. He then looked up at the general and nodded. "It is, sir. The NSA is electronically pinging the phone. It's him." Lifting the cell phone in his hand, the general relayed what they were seeing back to General Royal at SOCOM, who had them on speakerphone with the Joint Chiefs and the White House. While Seth and the others in the ops center could not hear what was being discussed over the cell phone, it was clear the decision-makers back in D.C. were discussing what to do next. A minute or so of silence ensued as the group collectively watched the man climb into a vehicle and start to drive away. The drone stayed locked onto the man's car as he started to head toward the A1-E75 highway that connected Skopje with Thessaloniki, Greece. Is this man trying to head to Greece or some other safe house along the way? Seth asked himself. While they contemplated where the man was headed, a decision had to be made in D.C. Another 60 seconds of tense silence ensued before the general nodded. He looked at the Delta commander. "We've been ordered to intercept the vehicle and bring the man in for questioning," he said. "The NSA's made a clear connection between this mystery man and Recepi. We already know Recepi is the man who ordered the attacks in the U.S. We need to know what this man's relationship to him is and who else may be involved. Go bring me that man, Lieutenant Colonel." With the order given, the Delta Squadron commander nodded and picked up another hand receiver. A second later, the helicopter blades of the two Ospreys down on the flight line increased in speed. After another minute transpired, the building rattled as the two aircraft flew overhead to fetch this mystery man. 10 minutes later, they heard the chopping of helicopter blades again. The Delta team had returned from their own raid with Recepi in tow. Seth stepped out of the ops center and caught a quick glimpse of them manhandling Recepi into a waiting van. A couple of other men dressed in 511 apparel hopped into the van as well, which Seth knew would be headed over to the interrogation room that had been prepared. Looking at his watch, Seth figured he had 20 minutes before the ODA team caught up to the mystery man in Macedonia. More than enough time to go check on our guest, he thought with a smile. Seth made a beeline to the small detention facility the Army still maintained on the base. He arrived about the same time the van from the flight did. When the door opened, Seth saw the two men in 511 apparel get out with Recepi and smiled. He recognized one of the men. The OGA had sent their best interrogator. The man looked up and saw Seth. He smiled but didn't say anything. Seth knew he wouldn't, at least not in front of the prisoner. When they brought Rosone inside, they immediately placed sensory deprivation goggles over his eyes and a headset over his ears. Then they chained him to his chair so he couldn't go anywhere. With the prisoner now taken care of and his mind and senses being assaulted, the OGA man turned to look at his unexpected visitor. "I should have known SOCOM would send you out here. How the hell are you, Seth?" he asked. "Oh, you know me, Smith. They still calling you Smith these days?" Seth asked in jest. He didn't actually know the man's real name. All part of his cover, he figured. Flashing a wry smile, the man responded, "Whatever do you mean, Seth? My name has always been and will always be Smith." Shaking his head in amusement, Seth switched topics. "Do you think you can break him?" he asked. "They all break, Seth. It's just a matter of when and how much they want to endure before they realize it." He turned back to look at the man thrashing about in his chair with the specialized equipment on. "I'll know more once I actually talk to him. Right now I need to soften him up a bit, so I figure I'll leave my toys on for the next hour or two. So back to you. Why are you out here, Seth?" Smith asked. "I thought the Army had moved you past this line of work." Smith pulled a pack of cigarettes out and lit one up. He offered the pack to Seth, but he shook his head. "I'm working for General Royal. He wants me out here as his eyes and ears. Figures I could be of some help to you guys." "Huh. Well, I hear they're bringing in another guy, too. If there's more than one prisoner, then I'd be glad to have your help. You're good at this job, Seth. You really should have taken us up on our offer a couple of years ago." He winked. "You know, that offer still stands if you ever get tired of wearing that monkey suit you're in." Seth looked off in the distance. He had seriously contemplated the offer when it was made. Ultimately, he'd known he couldn't accept it. He'd never get to see his kids, and his wife wouldn't stick around. It just wasn't meant to be. "Don't think I haven't thought about it, Smith. You know me, though. I've got a family now. I can't just walk away from that." Smith nodded. "No, you're right to turn us down, Seth. It's a tough life. Definitely not for everyone. Maybe if our paths had crossed before you turned into a family man." "Well, I need to get back to the ops center. I want to observe them capture this next guy. I'll catch up with you in a while," Seth said as he extended his hand. Smith shook it. "No problem. You know where to find me. I'll be here." Seth then turned around and started making his way back. As he walked, he couldn't help but think back to his time in Virginia. It had been a tempting offer. He'd nearly accepted it. Then he thought back to the day before all of this had kicked off, lounging around in the pool in the backyard with his kids. A smile crept across his face, and he knew he'd made the right decision. As soon as he walked back into the room, Seth noticed the apprehension immediately. "What the hell do you mean the Macedonians are telling us to stand down? On whose authority?" yelled General Lancaster to a captain who was holding a phone to his shoulder. "It's the ambassador. He's on the line, sir," the captain replied, voice shaking slightly. He held the receiver out for the general. Lancaster angrily walked over to the captain and snatched the receiver. "This is Brigadier General William Lancaster. To whom am I speaking?" he barked. A few seconds went by before they heard the next interplay of the one-sided conversation. "On whose authority are you trying to abort my mission, Ambassador?" Lancaster said tersely. Another pause ensued. "I understand the Macedonian Prime Minister just rescinded our permission to operate in his airspace. I have a special forces team that is less than 5 minutes away from intercepting this vehicle. We're going to move forward and grab this man," Lancaster insisted. No one could hear what the ambassador was saying, but at that point, Seth was sure that he heard the volume and tempo of the voice on the other end of the line getting louder and more aggressive. "Mr. Ambassador, I have been ordered by the President of the United States to intercept that vehicle and apprehend that man. the general insisted. The NSA has directly linked him to the mastermind of the terrorist attacks on our country. I am going to do as I was directed. If you have a problem with that, then you tell the Prime Minister to call the President. The general didn't wait long for the ambassador's response this time and interrupted him. You tell that bastard that if his people try to interfere in this operation, I will order my men to treat it as a hostile act. Do you understand, Mr. Ambassador? Before any more heated words could be said, General Lancaster hung up the phone. He turned to the Delta commander. Patch me through to the ODA team, he barked. A second later, one of the sergeants in the ops center handed him a radio receiver. Captain, this is Lancaster. There may be a complication in your orders. Apparently, someone is grabbing the Macedonian Prime Minister by the balls and squeezing him to get us to let this car go. We've been ordered by the President not to let that happen. You're to treat anyone that tries to interfere in your capture as hostile, to include the host nation. Is that clear? You will interdict that vehicle and you will bring that man back to Bondsteel. Do I make myself clear? The general nodded as the captain acknowledged the orders. See you in 30 mics, Captain. Out. With that, the general handed the receiver back. He then turned to one of the other NCOs and ordered, Get me General Royal. A minute went by, and then General Lancaster was on the phone with his boss back at SOCOM, who was still also on the phone with the Pentagon and the White House, letting them know what was transpiring in Macedonia. Seth scratched his head, deep in thought. Someone must have had some serious pull with the Prime Minister to get him to interfere in an operation he'd approved just 30 minutes earlier. The question was, who? Who could have called him in that time frame that would have had that kind of pull? Chapter 11. Going Postal. October 27th, 2020. Raleigh, North Carolina. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Field Office. Special Agent Trey Mandel was exhausted as he lifted the fresh cup of coffee to his lips. I can't wait till this election is over, he thought. This terrorism alert is sucking the life out of me. Wake up, sleepyhead, Linda Conway said as she walked up to his desk. Trey yawned as he placed his mug back down on his desk. You're way too chipper this early in the morning. How do you do it? He asked jokingly. Linda chuckled. It's easy. I have a 3-year-old who gets up at the crack of dawn, that's how, she said. Now grab your stuff, we've got an assignment. Holding a hand up in protest, Trey responded, Come on, Linda. I'm buried in paperwork right now. I still need to write up my 302s on the interviews from last night. You know, that bogus report on some Middle Eastern men casing the YMCA down on Hillsborough Avenue. Since the horrific terrorist attack less than a week ago, the FBI had been chasing down every possible lead and tip being phoned in by the public or local law enforcement. It was sadly stretching the agency beyond its breaking point, as its agents were being run ragged. Add in the continued cyber attacks against the various state election offices and the claims of voter intimidation by various far-right and far-left fringe groups, and many of the agents were ready to collapse from exhaustion. Tough luck, big guy, Linda replied. We've got ourselves a real case today. No more chasing down terrorist threats. Come on, I'll explain in the car. Reluctantly, Trey grabbed his notepad, pulled his sidearm out of his desk drawer, and attached it to his belt. After grabbing his suit jacket, he chased after Linda, his supervising agent. 10 minutes later, the two of them were in their government car, headed into Raleigh. So where are we going, Linda? Asked Trey. The post office, she responded. We got an alert sent to us from the IRS. Apparently a couple of postal workers in the local area have made some rather substantial deposits, and they believe something fishy is going on. Linda turned down onto Fayetteville Street, which would lead them to the central post office for Raleigh. Trey sighed loudly. You've got to be kidding me, he remarked. Now they have us chasing down suspicious bank activities? Don't they know we have better things to be doing with our time than this? Linda shot a look at Trey like she would to her 7-year-old when he complained about something. Trey, we're the FBI. That's our job. We look into suspicious things and then determine if there is something more there or if it's just nothing. Geez, don't they teach you guys anything at the academy anymore? Okay, boss, Trey said, shooting his hands up in mock surrender. Tell me more. What has the IRS so up in a tizzy that they're sticking 2 FBI agents on a couple of underpaid postal workers? Well, first off, there are 4 postal workers in question in Raleigh. Second, the workers in question made some truly substantial deposits in the last couple of weeks. One of them deposited $79,000, another one $116,000, and a third paid off a $78,000 mortgage balance. What really makes things interesting is that they all did this on the same day. Now, mind you, a postal worker's annual salary tends to average around $68,000 here in Raleigh. So these deposits are way outside the norm. She turned briefly to look at her young partner. Does that sound like it's worth the FBI looking into? She asked with a smirk. Trey nodded. He realized he'd spoken too quickly without having all the facts, something Linda had brought up to him on more than one occasion this past year. Trey was still in his 2-year probationary period with the FBI. Fresh out of Quantico, he'd landed a cushy position in the nice, medium-sized field office of Raleigh, while most of his classmates had gone directly to the large field offices. I see your point, Linda, he said. You mentioned something about 4 workers in Raleigh. Does that mean there are postal workers in other areas that are being looked at as well? She smiled. Now you're using the noggin, my young Padawan. Yes, our SAC told me this morning that agents in Texas, Georgia, Florida, and Ohio are also looking into cases where a handful of postal workers have made some suspicious bank deposits as well. So it's not just us here in North Carolina looking into this. A few minutes later, they pulled into a parking space at the main post office for Raleigh. It took them a few minutes to get to the Postmaster General for the building, but once they did, they asked about the 4 individuals in question. If you don't mind me asking, why are you inquiring about 4 of my postal workers? Asked the postmaster with a look of concern on his face. None of us are in any sort of danger, are we? He asked. No one is in any danger, at least not that we're aware of. It's just a routine check right now, nothing to be concerned about, replied Linda. They had decided that she would take the lead on this meeting. She nodded to Trey to go ahead, though. Can you tell us a bit about their roots? He asked. How long have they been with the post office? And have they had any financial problems that you're aware of? Linda looked on and smiled. Turning to face Trey, who stood ready with his pen, ready to write, the postmaster replied, yeah, I guess. A minute went by as he pulled up their personnel files. It looks like they've all been with us for a while. With the exception of Julie Parsons, they've all been working for the post office for 20 or more years. As to your other question, I don't see any notes by their supervisors about any of them having any financial problems, no requests for cash advances, no reports of them mishandling any letters or packages, and no reports of theft against them. Actually, they all appear to be good workers. Can you tell us about their routes? Where do they typically deliver the mail? Trey asked. Oh yeah, here it is, the postmaster said after tinkering with the computer. It looks like they largely handle bulk deliveries. Leaning forward, Linda asked, Can you clarify that for me? What do you mean by bulk deliveries? Yeah, so a bulk delivery is when we deliver mail to Walmart, an apartment complex, or a retirement center. The postal worker will typically pick up large boxes of letters or packages and deliver the same type of material to the location. Because of the large number of articles they handle there, they don't typically make a lot of stops throughout the day. Ah, okay, Trey acknowledged. Can you tell us what kind of places these 4 tend to make deliveries to? He asked, pen busily taking notes. Sure, let me look. A minute went by as the postmaster examined each of the routes. It It looks like the 4 of them primarily handle a series of retirement communities and nursing homes. Does that help?" Linda and Trey looked at each other and then nodded. "Yes, I think that does. I think we have what we need. If we need to talk with these individuals, how should we reach them during working hours?" asked Linda as she stood up. "I can give you the individual post office addresses they work out of," said the postmaster. "Usually, the workers arrive back at the office around 3 p.m. to finish sorting through the day's mail before they end their shifts at 5 p.m. If you miss them, well, I'm sure you know how to find their homes, but I can give you their addresses of record if you'd like." Smiling, Trey replied, "That would be great. Thank you again for your help." 5 minutes later, Linda and Trey climbed back into their car, headed back to the office to write up what they had so far and compare notes with the other field offices. They wanted to see if they could find any correlations among the workers themselves. Something wasn't adding up, but they weren't quite sure yet what it all meant. Washington, D.C., FBI Headquarters, J. Edgar Hoover Building. The TV in Deputy Director Joseph Luttrell's office was on, but muted. Fox News was running through their normal programming, and Joe was dutifully ignoring whatever they were droning on about. He had far more important things to do than get sucked into whatever political diatribe the talking heads and pundits were going on about. The only reason he even left the TV on at all was that on the off chance that some breaking news happened, he could quickly learn about it. "What exactly am I looking at?" Joe asked Ashley Bonhoff, his assistant deputy director. She'd slapped a large collection of paperwork on his desk, which appeared all too organized. He smiled half-heartedly. Ashley was like the Energizer Bunny. She had an endless supply of energy and was completely married to her job at the FBI. If he wasn't careful, she'd be his boss one day. It was 2 hours after lunch, and Joe was in that mid-afternoon funk, the kind that usually happened when he ate a heavy meal and all the blood pooled to his stomach, dealing with his poor decision to overeat. Not enough oxygen was making its way to his brain, and it was slowing his cognitive abilities. "A couple of things, sir. This one is a report from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network that came to us on Monday," Ashley explained, pointing to one of the stacks. "They flagged 34 postal workers for suspicious banking activities. At first, I didn't think too much of it, but I had someone from our threat finance cell take a look at it, and they recommended we send it out to the field offices to have the local agents try and piece together some additional information. Yesterday, I got the initial reports from the Raleigh, Dallas, Cleveland, and Miami offices, and they all have one thing in common. All of the postal workers in question made bulk deliveries and pickups at the same types of facilities, nursing homes and retirement communities." Ashley held up a hand to get ahead of any questions. "Now, I would not have thought to do what I did next, but I was sent a query from our liaison rep out at U.S. Special Operations Command asking about the integrity of our mail-in and absentee ballot system. At first, I thought it was an odd question, so I asked her why she was inquiring about it. She told me someone at Cybercom had mentioned it in a brief to the Secretary of Defense last week, and now the SOCOM commander wanted some additional information on it. Now, when I heard these postal workers made bulk deliveries and pickups at nursing homes and retirement communities, it set off a few red flags in my head. I reached out to the state election offices in those particular districts and asked if they had seen any unusual activity in the early voting or absentee and mail-in ballots. They told me that they had sent out around the same percentage of absentee ballots as they had in the previous elections. However, they'd noticed a drop-off in the number of ballots that had been returned up to that point. While people have until the actual day of the election to have them mailed in, they typically would have seen close to 90% of the ballots they sent out turned back in by now. One of the election offices told me the typical turnaround time from when the absentee ballot is mailed out to when it's returned is less than 2 weeks. As of right now, less than 30% have been returned in these districts. Joe considered the situation for a moment. He was hesitant to get involved in anything that resembled politics. His predecessors had done that, and they had all been charged with lying to investigators. I don't want to end up on the wrong side of things, he thought. Sighing, Joe ran his fingers through his hair as he looked at his young protege. So let me try and walk this out. One of the election officers said they mail a ballot out to a voter, and based on historical data of past elections, that same ballot is typically returned to them within 2 weeks. But presently, only 30% of the ballots mailed out have been returned, when at this time in previous elections, that number would be closer to 90%. Did I miss anything? He asked. He realized that he'd repeated her, but he wanted to make sure that he understood the ramifications of what she was implying. Ashley smiled and nodded. And to think some people around here think you've lost your sharpness. Wincing at the jab to his age, Joe retorted, I didn't realize people thought that of me. Then he suddenly yawned, unable to control the bad timing of that innate response. Leaning forward, Ashley said, Please tell me I'm onto something here, Joe. I know we don't have all the information just yet, but the election is now less than 6 days away, and somehow a massive number of absentee ballots has turned up missing in several critical swing districts. Snorting at the implication, Joe looked at the field office locations on the map in front of him. Look, Ashley, I'm no political science guy. I have no idea what the implications are of a few thousand absentee ballots not being counted in these districts. It looks to me, just by judging by location, that these all look to be heavily Democratic districts. Are you thinking that someone is trying to re-tip that balance? Now it was Ashley's turn to pause and think about her response. I'm not sure. I don't know what the percentage is of Republican or Democrat voters that vote via absentee ballot in those particular districts. Let me write that down as a follow-up question to ask, though. Joe nodded. That sounds like a good plan. Why don't you look into that? And if you find something else of interest, then we can address it. He leaned forward. In the meantime, how bad is the political fallout in Macedonia and the other neighboring countries after yesterday's Special Forces raid? It looked pretty fantastical on the news last night. That Osprey landing in the middle of the highway like that to block traffic right in front of the Greek border, and those soldiers running out to snatch that guy right from his vehicle. I still can't believe no one got hurt or shot. The president's decision to go after the Islamic terrorists who were behind the recent terrorist attack was making some political waves, both at home and abroad. Many people saw it as a stunt right before the election, while many others were ecstatic to see the U.S. go after the terrorists so quickly. Of course, the death of the U.S. ambassador in Kosovo had also added fuel to the fire for a quick and decisive military action. Ashley sighed at the question. She had also been tasked with handling some of the foreign blowback that was taking place in the Balkans. The FBI's legal attachés at the embassies were screaming for more help. They were getting bombarded by the local governments for help in dealing with what had suddenly become a very active group of Islamic extremists. They needed assistance coordinating things with the U.S. military, which had suddenly flooded the region with Special Forces soldiers carrying out raids across national borders with impunity. What a mess that whole thing is turning out to be, Joe. Why did you have to make me the point person for that? She asked glumly. She began collecting up the papers she'd been showing him. Because you want to be director someday. That means you'll need to know how to handle working with all of the foreign aspects of the FBI. How is the legal attaché doing in Skopje? He's fine. The embassy appears to be fine. It's the internal politics of Macedonia that seem to be in some trouble. No one is sure what the heck happened. One minute the Prime Minister was all over having the U.S. purge his ethnically Albanian Muslim problem. The next minute, the Prime Minister is screaming bloody murder to the ambassador about us trying to go after a Chinese national living in Skopje. She finished stuffing her papers into her folder. The target of the raid was a Chinese national? I thought it was a money guy that was connected to the terrorist group that carried out the terrorist attack a week ago, Joe said, forehead scrunched up in thought. It was a money guy. He just happened to be a Chinese national. Apparently, he worked at the Silk Road Bank of Macedonia. The military has him in custody now. I suspect we'll find out what's going on at some point, once they start publishing some intelligence reports on his interrogation. Joe got lost in thought for a moment. Something seemed off about all this. Why would a Chinese national fund an Islamic extremist attack on American soil? He asked himself. Ashley, before you leave, I want you to look into that voting angle you mentioned, Joe requested. Find out from those election officials what the stats are on Republican versus Democratic absentee ballots in those districts. Also, try and find out where the money is coming from that these postal workers suddenly seem to be acquiring. Have the field agents bring in all the postal workers and start squeezing them for information on the source of the money. Something just seems off. I can't quite place it. But we need to move on this. Bring them in today, will you? Sure thing, boss. I'll get back to you tomorrow when I have more to report. Kosovo, Camp Bonsteel. The weather had turned decidedly cold in the last 24 hours. The temperature had dropped down to 42 degrees, and it was threatening rain. Dark clouds rolled in ominously. Lieutenant Colonel Seth Mitchell was sitting in the Ops Center, reviewing the latest dossier the NSA, DIA, and CIA had put together. What does a Chinese national have to do with funding an Islamic extremist group in the Balkans? He wondered. Sensing someone walking up behind him, Seth turned to see Brigadier General William Lancaster approaching him. The general had that look on his face that said he was about to task him with a difficult project. "Morning, sir. You got something for me?" he asked. Pulling up a chair next to him, the general sat down and looked around to make sure no one was nearby or could be listening to them. He then leaned in and quietly said, "Look, Seth, the OGA interrogator has been questioning Rajepi for nearly 14 hours. We've had this Chinese nationalist stewing in a holding cell since his capture. We need to start questioning him and getting some answers." Seth nodded. "I talked with Smith, the OGA interrogator, last night. He's ascertaining some peripheral information on the Chinese guy from Rajepi first. Then he wants to question the Chinese national with what he's learned from our Kosovar friend. He'll get what we need, sir. I've worked with Smith. He's really good at his job." "That may be so, but we're getting a lot of heat right now from State Department, the FBI, and now it appears the Kosovo government about holding this Chinese national," Lancaster said glumly. "I'm not sure who this guy is or what's going on, but the Chinese government is apparently very interested in getting him back. The Chinese are making all sorts of waves in Kosovo and with the EU about the abduction of one of their citizens." The general paused for a second before adding, "I'm not confident that we'll be able to hold him much longer. I want you to find out from Smith what he has and go question him now." Seth shrugged. "I can, but I'm not sure how fast we'll get answers. These types of things take time. It's like peeling away the layers of an onion. If he's had any sort of interrogance resistance training—" Lancaster interrupted. "I know. Look, this doesn't go any further than you and me. The president signed a secret order an hour ago and sent it over to the director of the CIA and our boss, General Royal. We're to use extreme measures to obtain the information we need. We don't have a lot of time. And if there is another terrorist attack planned that's going to coincide with the election, we need to know about it. We're 5 days out from Election Day. We don't have time to dawdle." Seth shook his head in dismay. "There'd better be some sort of immunity or top cover for me," he asserted. "I'm not going through Yemen all over again." Lancaster placed his hand on Seth's shoulder. I've got your back on this one, Seth. I won't leave you in a lurch. If anyone tries to hang this on your shoulders, they'll have to hang it on mine as well." After taking a deep breath in and holding it for several seconds, Seth let it out slowly. "Okay, I'll do it," he responded. "I was told you brought my kit with you in case we needed it. Is that accurate?" "We did," Lancaster replied. "Tell your friend Smith about the order, if his own people haven't already. You guys don't have long to get what we need, so get to it." Seth nodded, got up, and headed out to the small detention facility where they were holding their 2 guests. After a short walk, he neared the appropriate building, but saw that there were now a couple of plainclothes guards wearing body armor stationed outside, wearing M4s slung across their chests at the low ready. One of them held his hand up, saying, "Sorry, sir, this is a restricted area." A second later, the door to the building opened up and Smith walked out. His eyes lit up when he saw Seth, and he walked past the guard toward him. "It's okay, guys, he's with me. He's on the list." The guards nodded and then returned to their stoic stance, making sure their stoic stares warded off anyone that happened to walk near their facility. Guiding them past the guards, Smith walked into the facility with Seth. They walked over to a table with a couple of free chairs next to some computers, being manned by a couple of analysts. "Let me bring you up to speed with what we've found so far. Oh, and before I forget, your kit is over on the other table." Smith smiled a devilish grin. "It's good to have you back, my friend." Shaking his head at the reference, Smith responded, "I keep trying to get out, but they keep pulling me back in." The guys around him all laughed. "Okay, enough chit-chat," said Smith good-naturedly. "We've got a lot of work to do, and from what my boss tells me, we don't have a lot of time. We're going to have to cut this joker loose soon, so we need to squeeze him for as much as we can." Smith shook his head in dismay. "I'm not sure who this guy's related to, but he's got some serious pull with the Chinese government. They are hooting and hollering for his release back in D.C., here in Europe, and in Kosovo, too." "So I've heard." Seth leaned forward. "So what do we know about him?" "Sadly, not much. We know he works as a bank executive for the Silk Road Bank in Skopje. The bank itself is headquartered in Bar, Switzerland, just south of Zurich. He's been employed there for roughly 6 years and spent most of that time with the company here in the Balkans, mostly doing banking services in Macedonia, Greece, Kosovo, Albania, Serbia, and Bosnia. So you can bet he's met with a lot of folks in this region. Now, while we don't have a lot of data on him, we do have his passport stamps, and his electronic devices are starting to yield some interesting information." One of the nearby analysts plopped down in a chair next to Seth. "Yeah, like one of the 2 laptops he was captured with appears to be linked to that large Gmail and White House hack from 2 years ago. You remember, that KHS group that supposedly pulled off the hack?" Seth rubbed at the 5 o'clock shadow that was already growing on his face. What does this hack from 2 years ago have to do with Islamic extremists from the Balkans? He wondered. "Okay, so what exactly do you want me to ask him?" Seth asked. "I suspect you want me to question him while you keep focusing on Regepi, right?" Smith nodded. "Now that we've been green-lighted to use the other tools in our bag, yeah. I want you to figure out who he's really working for and what type of support he's providing to Regepi's group. Does he know of any other terrorist attacks against our country? What is his connection to the KHS hacker group? And what did he have to do with the Gmail and White House hack from 2 years ago?" Seth snorted at the request. "You want me to find out who he dated when he was 16 while I'm at it?" Smith just shot him a dirty look as he shook his head. "You have your marching orders, soldier. Get to it." His tone suggested that he spoke in jest, but meant every word of it. Without saying anything further, Seth nodded and got up. He grabbed his gym bag and pulled out a pair of 511 pants and shirt. He proceeded to change out of his military uniform into the civilian attire. He wasn't going to let this guy know he was military if he could avoid it. Best the man think he was CIA and believe the rules were lax or non-existent. 10 minutes later, Seth opened the door to the hallway that led to the 4 interrogation rooms in the small facility. Rajepi was in one room, and their Chinese mystery man was in another. Walking up to the appropriate door, Seth turned the handle and walked in. Strapped to a chair in front of a small table was a man, roughly 5 feet 7 inches tall. He looked to have soft, manicured hands, the hands of someone who doesn't do a lot of dirty work. Seth observed that he still had on the sensory deprivation equipment. He nodded toward the guard standing behind his new Chinese friend to take it off. Once the goggles and headphones were off the prisoner, the man blinked several times and briefly shook his head, looking around the poorly lit room to get a sense of where he was being held. When the Special Forces soldiers had captured him, they had injected him with a drug that had knocked him out for nearly 12 hours. Once he had awoken 5 hours ago, they immediately placed the sensory deprivation equipment on him. The combination of the induced sleep and the disorienting effects of the equipment he'd been wearing would have caused the man to be completely unaware of how long he'd been in their custody. He would likely think that he'd been held for 3 or 4 more days at this point. Sitting down in front of the prisoner, Seth pulled the man's passport out and held it up. He opened it and read the name aloud. Wen Zhenyu. The man looked at him cautiously and then nodded. "That is my name. Who are you? Why am I being held?" he asked angrily in excellent English. Seth detected a hint of Midwestern accent, as if he'd spent some time in the Chicago area. Dismissing the prisoner's question, Seth asked, "Who are you working for?" Scoffing at the question, Wen replied, "I work as a bank executive for the Silk Road Bank in Skopje. I specialize in business and construction loans." Wen continued to look around the room, searching for clues that might help him figure out who was holding him and where he was. Seth shook his head. "I know that's your official cover. What I want to know is, who do you really work for?" Seth observed the man's eyes darting around the room a bit more, searching for something but apparently not seeing what he was looking for. "I'm a Chinese citizen. You have no right to hold me. I have done nothing wrong. I demand to speak to someone from my consulate," Wen said angrily. Seth shook his head. Then he opened the manila folder he had and placed it on the table. Wen looked at the folder, almost surprised by its sudden appearance. Holding a picture of Rajepi up for him to look at, Seth asked, "Who is this man?" Wen looked at the picture and shook his head. "I have no idea who that is. I demand to speak with someone from my consulate," he said again indignantly. Maintaining a calm demeanor, Seth held up Wen's cell phone. "This is your phone, isn't it?" Wen looked at the phone nervously but nodded. Pulling out a small digital recording, Seth proceeded to play the recording of the intercepted phone call between Wen and Rajepi. When Wen heard his voice and Rajepi's on the other end, his eyes grew a little wider before he quickly regained his composure. "You fabricated that recording," he said, seething. "I have no idea who that other voice belongs to. I demand you allow me to talk with someone from my consulate. I will not say another word," he shouted angrily. Enough is enough, Seth thought. He slammed his hand on the metal table, his wedding ring slapping the metal with a hard crack as he lurched out of his chair. In one swift motion, he grabbed the right side of the table and hurled it onto its side, causing the guard standing behind Wen to jump back slightly. Seth was on Wen before he even knew what had happened. Seth grabbed Wen by the throat, lifting him right out of his chair. He used the force of his forward momentum to shove Wen past the guard, who had moved out of the way just in time for Seth to slam Wen's body against the back wall of the interrogation room. The man couldn't have weighed more than 140 pounds. Seth effortlessly manhandled him. As he lifted Wen off the ground, choking him, Seth leaned in close to his face, looking him in the eyes with burning anger and hatred. He shouted, "Enough games! Your cover's blown! You've been caught aiding and abetting a known terrorist who attacked our nation. You're either going to talk to me, or so help me God, you're going to wish you were dead." He threw Wen down and let him sink to the floor as he gasped for air. Seth looked at the guard, who only raised an eyebrow at what had just unfolded. "Fix the table and sit him back in his chair," Seth ordered. "Put the restraints back on him. I'll be back in a couple of minutes." Then he proceeded to leave the room. He wants to play hardball? That's fine. I've got plenty of tools left in my toolbox, he thought. A maniacal grin spread across his face. Walking out into the hall, Seth made his way back to the outer room where he had his kit waiting for him. When he walked inside, he saw Smith standing there with his hands on his hip. "It's good to watch you in action, Seth," he said with a smirk. "You have him on tilt for sure." "I hate letting that side of me come out," Seth replied rather glumly. Deep down, he hated allowing that inner animal out. It wasn't who he was. It was a trained response and not something he felt he could always control. Yemen had taught him that much. Just then, General Lancaster walked into the room and approached Smith and Seth. "Have you guys found anything yet? I've got a call with the Pentagon in about 2 hours, and I'm going to need to give them a reason to stall us handing Wen over to the Chinese. A special envoy from the Chinese government is landing here in Kosovo in 3 hours. They're flying in directly from Beijing." "We must really have someone big if they're sending a special envoy to fetch this guy. You best move right to the good stuff, Seth," Smith added. They had hoped to have more time to question him, but that wouldn't happen now, unless they uncovered something big. Seth nodded and grabbed his small bag of tricks and headed back in. Walking back into the room, he noticed Wen didn't seem quite as confident in his situation as he had just a few minutes prior. Good. Maybe I've gotten his attention, Seth hoped. "You can't do this to me. I demand to speak with someone from my consulate." Seth placed his small bag on the table and proceeded to pull some items out of it, placing each small box on the table in front of Wen, doing his best to make a show of each one of them. Wen squirmed a bit, unsure of what was about to befall him. "You're an American. You can't torture me," Wen insisted. "It's against your laws." He was clearly nervous now. For added fear factor, Seth pulled out needle-nose pliers, a ball-peen hammer, a cigar cutter, and a small, battery-powered bone saw. Wen's eyes were now truly ready to bug out of his head. Seth gave a wicked grin as he flicked the safety switch on the bone saw off. He gave it just enough juice to spin the blades, producing a horrifying whine as the metal saw began to spin hundreds of revolutions a second. All color drained from Wen's face. Seth then turned the saw off and placed it back on the table, staring at the man sitting before him. "Look, Wen, this can go one of 2 ways," Seth explained. "You're either going to answer my questions and tell me what you know, or this is going to get painful. It's not going to hurt me in the least, but I can guarantee you will feel pain like you've never felt before in your life. The kind of pain you didn't know existed. Do you understand me, Wen?" For the first time since they had started talking, Wen truly looked scared. Seth leaned in. "Wen, I can tell you're thinking you'll try to hold out as long as possible. You're telling yourself to fall back on your training, that what your instructors taught you will help you evade my questions, that if you hold out long enough, someone from your government will come get you." Wen turned his head up to look at Seth, with a surprised expression, as if Seth had just read his mind. "Wen, you are all alone, and no one is coming to save you. Don't make me hurt you. Don't make me do this to you," Seth said as he waved his hand across the items on the table. Seth leaned forward so that he was looking into Wen's eyes. "Let me tell you a secret, Wen. No matter how strong a person is, no matter how much training they've had, They all break. It's just a matter of time and patience. But eventually, everyone breaks. The only question is, how much pain do you want to go through before you decide you've had enough? Please, Wen, don't make me use these tools on you, Seth implored. Wen shook his head in anger and frustration. You can't do this. It goes against everything your country stands for, every law you've passed. You can't torture me like this. I didn't do anything, and I demand to be let go. Seth looked down at Wen, disappointment written on his face. He then moved over to one of the small boxes and opened it. Inside was a syringe and a vial of clear liquid. He pulled them out and proceeded to fill the syringe with 3 cc's of the clear fluid. He flicked the syringe and pushed the plunger up a little bit to remove an air bubble before he looked at the guard. Hold him, Seth ordered. The guard moved forward and grabbed Wen firmly by the shoulders. Wen tried to squirm as Seth grabbed Wen's left arm with a death grip. He then stuck the needle into his deltoid muscle and depressed the plunger. When all the liquid was pushed out, Seth pulled the needle out and moved back to the small box, where he placed the used syringe and the small vial. The guard behind Wen released his grip and moved back a couple of paces behind him, awaiting further instructions. While Seth let the drug start to work its way through Wen's bloodstream, he moved over to the corner of the room and grabbed the tripod and camera he had leaned against the wall. He set it up and double-checked that it was properly aimed at Wen before he turned it on and started the recording. It took about 20 more seconds for the medication to have its desired effect, but once it began to settle in, Wen's entire demeanor changed. His eyes became a little glassy, and he seemed incredibly relaxed. Seth let the drug work a little longer before he started to ask Wen some very generic questions about Wen's childhood, where he had grown up, what his favorite food was, his first girlfriend, his first childhood crush, all the things that elicited a happy memory for him. Seth knew this would put Wen in a happy mental state and distract him from his current surroundings. Now that Wen was properly primed, the real questioning began in earnest. Wen, you said you work for the Silk Road Bank in Skopje. Who do you really work for? Wen smiled a goofy smile. I don't work for the Silk Road Bank. I work for the Ministry of State Security. Now we're getting somewhere, Seth thought. What's your job with the Ministry of State Security? Asked Seth. Rolling his head a bit, Wen answered, My job is to undermine the United States government and foment anti-U.S. feelings among the Muslim communities in Southeast Europe. What is your relationship with Rajepi? Seth asked. He was getting into the groove of asking questions now. I'm his handler. He's my asset, silly. He does what I tell him to do, Wen replied sarcastically. Can I get some water or a stiff drink? I could really go for a stiff drink right about now, he added. Not wanting to distract from his happiness, Seth nodded for the guard to go get them something to drink. Seth knew they had a bottle of rakia, a type of brandy that was popular in the Balkans, sitting out by the analysts for just this type of situation. Did you order Rajepi to carry out a terrorist attack against the U.S.? Seth asked. Smiling a mischievous smile, Wen confessed, I sure did. It's my masterpiece. Years of planning and millions of dollars later, I achieved a bigger success than I ever thought possible. Who ordered you to carry out this attack? The Ministry of State Security, of course. We Chinese do exactly as we are told, unlike you Americans. We don't go rogue. We're good communists, he replied jovially. Man, what kind of drugs did you give me? I feel great. I haven't felt this happy in I don't know how long." Seth smiled. "I'm glad you're liking them. I have plenty more I can give you. What was your involvement with the Kosovo hacker group 2 years ago?" He wanted to see if there was a connection between these two events. Shaking his head, Wen said, "KHS was just a cover. I needed to find out what tariffs or economic sanctions President Sachs was going to implement on my country after your 2018 midterm elections. My government needed to know what your government was planning to do." Seth was surprised by the response. It was a bit more than he thought he would have gotten, but it sure explained an awful lot about why the Chinese had been responding toward the U.S. the way they had. They had an inside track on what the president was going to do, so they could sidestep him at every turn. An idea suddenly popped into Seth's head. Is the Ministry of State Security going to interfere in the U.S. presidential election? He asked. Laughing at the question, Wen just shook his head. "You have no idea what's coming. We're not interfering in your election. We've already picked your next president, and there isn't a damn thing you or anyone else can do about it." Just then the guard walked back into the room, a bottle of rakia and a couple of shot glasses in his hand. "Ah, about time you got back with the good stuff," said Wen. "Pour me a drink, and I'll tell you all about the puppet regime we're setting up here in the Balkans, and your new president." Chapter 12. Dominoes Falling. October 28th, 2020. Washington, D.C. Department of Homeland Security. The weather had moved from an Indian summer to decidedly cold in the span of a few days in D.C., which Patricia felt was a sign of things to come. The more she read of the report from Kosovo, the more she felt like she was going to throw up. She put the folder down and stared at her computer monitor. It still had the video of the interrogation paused on it. She had watched it, but paused it midway through so she could read the actual report and the analysis that went along with it to help her put the entire thing into context. She had to admit, what she was reading was nothing short of absolutely horrifying. It was the government's absolute worst fear about what could happen during an election, and it didn't seem like there was anything they could do to stop the wheels from falling off this wagon train. An hour went by as she sat, numbly, in her office, watching the interrogation video and reading through the report. When she was done, she knew she had to start bringing more people into the loop. This was about to get deadly serious, and her department had to do whatever was necessary to get ahead of it. By 11 a.m., she had assembled several of her deputies and department heads, along with the group that was handling election security. Joining them for the meeting, much to her relief, was the Deputy Director of the FBI, Joseph Luttrell, along with a senior official from the CIA and NSA. It was all hands on deck as they tried to figure out what to do next. Seeing that everyone who needed to be present had arrived, Patty called the meeting to order. "Thank you, everyone, for coming over on such short notice. I know you all are busy, and worse, it's nearly the end of the week, so everyone wants to get things finalized before the election. However, we are here today because our nation is about to be attacked by Islamic extremists. Our presidential election is about to be interfered with by foreign actors." A murmur could be heard in the room, as many of the people shared nervous glances with each other. Because of the gravity of what has recently been uncovered, we have several folks from our interagency partners here to help bring us up to speed on certain aspects of what has been discovered. With that said, I'm going to hand the meeting over to Mr. Luttrell, she said, as she nodded for him to begin. Joe cleared his throat as he prepared to give his remarks. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Joe Luttrell, and I'm the Deputy Director at the FBI. Thanks to the hard work of our military overseas and efforts by the CIA and the NSA, he said as he nodded toward the two agency reps, in the last couple of days, we've become aware of 2 new terrorist attacks that are planned against our country. According to intelligence, the next attack is supposed to happen on Halloween, October 31st. Then a second attack is slated to happen on Election Day, November 3rd. Unfortunately, we don't know who the attackers are just yet. Our forces in Kosovo are working hard to uncover that information for us as we speak. What we've been able to track down from the lone attacker that was taken into custody after the October 24th attack is that we're dealing with an Albanian terrorist organization that goes by the name of the Islamic State of Kosovo, or ISK. All, and I want to emphasize this, all of the October 24th attackers had previously fought with ISIS in Syria and Iraq. They all originated from Kosovo and a small Albanian enclave in Macedonia. The ringleader for this organization is a man by the name of Luan Rejepi, a 44-year-old ethnic Albanian Kosovar. He fought against the Serbs in the 1999 war and was suspected of a number of atrocities committed against ethnic Serbs. In the mid-2000s, he traveled to Afghanistan and then later Iraq to fight against U.S. forces. One of his brothers was among the attackers as well. When Rejepi returned to Kosovo sometime in the late 2000s, he tried to form a terrorist organization with the intent of overthrowing the government and instituting a Sharia government led by him. He spent a couple of years in jail for sedition, and upon release from prison, he went right back to radicalizing people in his village. Sometime around 2017, ISK started to receive some large financial donations from an unknown source. The Treasury Department is still looking into where the funds originated from. With added money, he began to buy loyalty and new followers. For the next 2 years, his organization grew and trained. It's suspected that his group has somewhere around 200 members scattered across Kosovo, Macedonia, and Albania. What we've been able to ascertain about the Halloween attack is that this particular one will be carried out by a sister organization, the Islamic State in Bosnia. The Election Day attack is going to be carried out by the Islamic State in Serbia, also a sister organization to the ISK. For the next several minutes, he continued to lay out the history of the 3 organizations and who was responsible for and planning the terrorist attacks. Then he explained that the military had apprehended Rejepi 2 days ago in Kosovo. Was this that Special Forces raid we saw on the news that took place in Macedonia, with those 2 helicopters landing in the center of the highway near the Greek border? Asked one of the DHS department heads. Joe shook his head. No. That was the apprehension of another man by the name of Wen Zhenyu. He is ultimately the reason why we've called this meeting. As he shook his head, Riku Tanaka asked, "What does a Chinese national have to do with this Albanian terrorist group that attacked us?" "I'm getting to that," Joe said. "If you all can please stay patient a little bit longer, everything will become clear." During the apprehension of Rejepi, the NSA intercepted a phone call between him and Mr. Wen. "Jill, would you go ahead and play the conversation?" Joe asked. Jill nodded and pulled a small digital recorder out of a padlocked pouch she had brought with her. She gave the crowd a very stern look before declaring, "What I'm about to play for you is classified top secret. Its contents are not to be discussed outside this room. If they are, it won't take the NSA long to figure out who leaked it, and I can guarantee you that person will be prosecuted." The warning was so severe, even Patty felt a shiver of nervousness going down her spine. The conversation between the two played aloud, and Patty watched as many of the people in the room grew angry and surprised that this Chinese national was not just helping this known terrorist, but appeared to be actively involved in the planning of future attacks. When the tape ended, Joe added, "During the interrogation of Mr. Wen, we learned that he is actually a covert agent for the Ministry of State Security, the Chinese version of the NSA, CIA, and FBI, all rolled into one. In addition to the 2 terrorist attacks, he revealed a much larger plot that is already underway to subvert our presidential election." Patty saw several people place their hands over their mouths in shock, while others muttered a few curse words under their breath. Joe continued, "Our agents are in the process of arresting more than 24 sleeper agents that were going to carry out these attacks. Unfortunately, there is another cell that's responsible for the Election Day attacks, and we have not yet identified who their members are or where they are hiding. All we know is this second cell is tied to an Albanian enclave in Serbia known as Presevo. I'll let our agency rep tell you more about that." He nodded to the director of the CIA, Marcus Ryerson, to take over. Ryerson lifted his chin up as all eyes turned to look at him. "During our interrogation of Mr. Wen, we learned that he also funded a separate terrorist organization that has loose ties to Rejepi's group in an Albanian enclave called the Presevo Valley. That area has been a hotbed of Albanian Muslim extremism dating back to the Bosnian-Serbian War in the 1990s. It's seen an increase in extremist activity with the rise of ISIS in the Middle East. The Serbs estimate close to 300 or 400 young men and women from this area have traveled to Syria in the mid-2010s. We're currently working with the Serbs right now on trying to track down who the cell leader may be, and who, from that region, had mentioned traveling to the U.S., or may have already left for America. I'm afraid we do not have a lot of information on this second group just yet. What I can tell you is we are experiencing an enormous amount of pushback from every government in the region once we apprehended Mr. Wen. Prior to his arrest, all the Balkan countries were bending over backwards to help us hunt down these terrorists. Once we took Wen into custody, it was like a switch was turned on, and we immediately hit heavy resistance. I don't have to tell you how much the Serbs hate Kosovars, Albanians, or Muslims. Their hatred of each other goes back hundreds of years. Hell, they've ethnically cleansed entire villages over how much they hate each other. But right now, all of them are singing one unified voice, saying that we must release Mr. Wen and stop our unilateral abduction of these Islamic extremists. Patty saw the puzzlement on the faces of many in the room. She felt it too. Director Hogan chimed in at this point. "I think we should talk about why the Chinese are so adamant about us releasing Wen, and what he told us. We can't solve this problem if we don't disclose to everyone the full truth of what we've discovered." All eyes now turned back to FBI Deputy Director Luttrell. Joe sighed and nodded. "We noticed some irregularities with about a dozen postal workers who appeared to be receiving significant sums of money. When our agents looked into it, they discovered that these postal workers were responsible for picking up and dropping off bulk mail at nursing homes and various retirement communities. At first, we didn't know what to make of this common link they all seemed to have. When we questioned one of the postal workers about the large sums of money she had suddenly found herself inundated with, she broke down in tears and confessed what she was doing." Joe shook his head, as though he didn't want to be discussing this topic. "She told us a man she had been dating said he had a friend who would pay her $50 per absentee ballot she collected and turned over to his friend." Audible gasps and grumbling broke out in the room. Riku Tanaka jumped in. "This sounds like a wild story that's been spun to give an excuse if the administration loses the election next week." More than a few people shot Riku a dirty look at the comment. Joe immediately jumped in. Now hold on a second. My agents didn't make this crap up, and we aren't ginning something up to give an excuse to any one particular group in case they lose the election. Come on, what are we talking about? Riku retorted. A few hundred absentee ballots at most. This is a red herring. Joe slammed his hand on the table, startling half the people in the room. It's more than a few hundred ballots. This group in Charlotte alone bought more than 30,000 ballots. In South Florida, it's more like 65,000 ballots. We're talking about enough votes to swing the election in 5 states that have previously decided the election by less than 30,000 votes. Several people shook their heads in disbelief. Director Ryerson stood up and leaned forward on the table, leering over them all. You want more proof? Ask Director Hogan to share the interrogation video of Mr. Wen with you. She's seen the proof. The Chinese have stolen this election before we've even had it. They've financed these terrorist groups to carry out these attacks against us and then weaponized the videos of them on social media to tear us apart. If you think the Russians interfered in the 2016 election, the Chinese have outright manipulated the vote and weaponized our social media against us. The bigger question we have to ask is, now that we know what's been done, what do we do about it? This is a farce. The Chinese can't possibly manipulate the vote, Riku exclaimed angrily. You said these were absentee ballots, so we have no way of knowing if they took away votes from the Democrats or Republicans. For all we know, this is a desperate last gasp by an administration that looks to be losing a close election. Enough, Riku, Patty insisted, rebuking him publicly for his outburst. We're being given factual intelligence by the FBI, CIA, and NSA of direct foreign interference in our election. It doesn't matter what the polls say or what our opinion is of the current administration. Our duty is not to the administration, but to the Constitution of the United States and to our country. We have clear proof. As a matter of fact, here it is. She pulled out her government-issued laptop and brought up the interrogation, turning the computer around so everyone else could see it. This is the interrogation of Mr. Wen. This is about an hour into the interrogation. I'll let you listen to the interrogator ask him the questions, and you can hear Mr. Wen's response with your own ears. For the next 10 minutes, the group listened to the interrogator methodically question Mr. Wen about the election tampering. He went into detail about how they had chosen the specific districts and roughly how many absentee ballots they needed to intercept in order to reduce the number of votes to tilt the election result in each of those states to have the desired result. When the video was over, Riku indignantly asked, How do we know this guy wasn't tortured to say all of this? He looks pretty drugged to me. Jill, the NSA rep, shook her head at the comment. Whose side are you on? She asked. We've been shown a video interrogation of an admitted Chinese state security spy, an audio recording of him talking with the terrorist leader of the October 24th attack, and a confession of a postal worker involved in this plot to interfere with our election. And you still have the audacity to say this is all somehow being fabricated and made up? Where did you find this grossly incompetent idiot? She shot Director Hogan a look of contempt. Riku sat there silent for a moment, his face turned a darker shade. He was clearly fuming with anger, but he seemed to know enough to hold his tongue. Thank God, thought Patty. He's already said way more than he should have at this point. Joe, what's the director doing about this? Patty asked. Has he spoken with the AG or the president about it yet? Joe checked his watch, then responded. He should be meeting with the AG now. When he's done, I suspect the AG will probably want to talk with you about what to do with the information. I think we need to inform the president, but frankly, I'm not sure what can be done. The damage has already been done. More than 180,000 absentee ballots in 5 states have already been stolen. There's no way to know which person's ballot was stolen and which one was not. Short of voiding all absentee ballots and requiring everyone to cast a ballot in person, I don't know how you would fix this. And even if you did that, you'd disenfranchise the tens of millions of people who already voted absentee for one reason or another. Patty shook her head in disgust. Something needed to be done, and the president would ultimately have to make that call. Right now, she needed to give him some options to consider, but she didn't have the foggiest idea of what the best course of action would be. Washington, D.C., U.S. Supreme Court. Anna Cho finished preparing a fresh pot of coffee and a separate kettle of hot water for tea. Then she arranged a couple of tea bags on the pushcart. She made sure to grab the small container of half and half and some flavored creamers as well. She looked around cautiously. She was still alone. She quickly pulled out the small tube of red L'Oreal lipstick and smiled. Such a clever way to disguise its contents, she mused. She gently twisted the lower portion of the lipstick tube, which revealed a small compartment filled with metallic gray powder. She poured half of the powder into the coffee and the other half in the pot of hot water for the tea. In the blink of an eye, the powder dissolved and disappeared. Anna quickly put the container back together and then breathed a sigh of relief. God, I hope I didn't just breathe any of that in, she thought nervously. I guess I'll know in a week. With her primary mission now complete, she finished putting together the pushcart with the few remaining items. A sandwich cut into smaller squares for one justice, some macadamia nuts for another, some fresh fruit for a third. Each justice had their own favorite snack they liked, and people like Anna Cho and others who worked in the dining facility of the Supreme Court made sure the justices were well fed and hydrated throughout the day. Her co-worker, Maya Stankovic, walked back into the kitchen. "Do you need any help with that?" she asked. Smiling, Anna replied, "No, I think I have everything ready. Would you like to bring it up for them?" "Really? You'd let me do that?" asked Maya. "Are you sure?" Maya was a relatively new employee. She'd only been working here for about a year, so she typically did the more menial jobs in the kitchen. Anna, however, was more than happy to let the junior employee have the glory that day. After all, she needed to make sure she had an alibi for when the justices got sick. After today, Anna would be on a pre-approved vacation for 5 days, so by the time the justices started to show symptoms, she wouldn't even be at work to be considered a suspect. Especially when she'd be able to point to Maya having brought the justices their afternoon tea and coffee, and not her. She smiled warmly at her co-worker. "Yeah, you can bring the cart to them. Besides, you'll be doing this job for me while I'm on vacation, so it'll be good practice. Just remember, Chief Justice Mark Lighthouse is a prolific coffee drinker, and Justice Amy Keaton recently switched over to tea after her doctor recommended she change her diet. I've written out a small note on what each of them likes to drink and their favorite afternoon snack to help you out." Maya beamed. "That's so nice of you, Anna. Thank you for the help. I really appreciate it." She looked around to make sure no one else heard her. "Some of the other ladies here are really catty, aren't they?" she asked. Anna snickered at the comment. "They sure can be. We immigrants have to stick together," she said with a wink. Anna was a first-generation American from China, and Maya was a Bosnian Serb refugee. Her family had fled the war-torn nation back in the late 1990s to come to America. In all reality, America was the only home Maya had ever known, though she had visited Bosnia on a number of occasions to see family that still lived there. As Maya collected the pushcart and headed off to the justices' deliberation chambers, Anna smiled a mischievous smile, knowing that she was about to forever change the fabric of America. No other person from the Ministry of State Security would have the level of impact in the world that she would, and that fact alone warmed her deep within. Kosovo, Camp Bondsteel. Brigadier General William Lancaster stared at the video screen in frustration. The 60-inch monitor was split into 4 separate squares. One showed the Pentagon Situation Room, one had the SOCOM Ops Center, another had a briefing room at Langley, and the final square was the White House Situation Room. All the groups on the SVTCs were bickering about what to do about the evolving situation in the Balkans. General Lancaster rubbed his temples. He needed to get everyone back on track and provide some guidance on what to do next. "Hey, excuse me, everyone," he said in a rather loud voice. The talking heads on the other end of the SVTC stopped talking. "I understand there are a lot of political decisions that need to be made, but I've got some serious problems here in Kosovo that need an immediate decision," Lancaster insisted. "The Kosovo government says my forces don't have permission to operate inside their country, and for the time being, they're trying to keep my guys bottled up here on Bondsteel. In northern Kosovo, where we captured Rajepi, the Kosovo police have been fighting a near day-long gun battle with remnants of the ISK and desperately need help. At the NATO Kosovo Forces headquarters in Pristina, the German commander won't release his forces to go help them, and he further tells me that my forces have no authority to operate inside Kosovo. So on the one hand, I have the police and security service begging me for help. On the other hand, I have the government and the K4 commander telling me I have no authority or permission to operate in Kosovo. I need someone to make a decision as to what I'm supposed to do," Lancaster said in a frustrated tone. The President's National Security Advisor, Robert Gray, responded. "We're working on figuring that out, General. Hypothetically, are there any military or government forces in the nearby area that could prevent you from intervening on behalf of the Kosovo police should they opt to unilaterally request military help from the President in contradiction of their own government's guidance?" "Oh, talk about putting my guys in a bad position," thought Lancaster, controlling his urge to groan. He took a deep breath. "Not really," he responded. "There's Multinational Battle Group West, stationed in Camp Villaggio, Italia, near Pec. It consists of a small Italian and Austrian force, but they don't have anything that could really be considered a threat to my force. Likewise, there's a military police unit in Pristina that's composed entirely of Italian carabinieri. None of those two groups really have any sort of combat power that could stop my force, but I'd rather not have our guys square off if I can avoid it." "What about Serbia and Bosnia?" asked another person who was in the Situation Room with the President. "If you had to take unilateral action in either of those countries and go after the safe houses the CIA sources provided, could you?" General Lancaster thought about that question a bit more before he responded. "That's a trickier question, sir. I'll address Serbia first. The Serbs do have an actual military. I have no idea what kind of military force they have in the area, or if they would try to intervene. I'd like to think they'd sit on the sidelines and let us do what we needed to do. They don't like Albanians any more than we like Al-Qaeda. The bigger challenge in Serbia is the gendarmerie, which falls under control of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, or MUP. This paramilitary force reports directly to the President. If he's under pressure from the Chinese to protect this Albanian terrorist group, then you can bet he'll have the gendarmerie do it. I doubt the military would obey such an order, but the MUP certainly would. As to Bosnia, they also have a military, but it's relatively small. If they opted to protect the ISB, then they could prove to be a problem, but I doubt they'd get involved. Our bigger problem in Bosnia would be an actual fight with the ISB itself. From the most recent CIA report we have on them, their numbers hover around 500 to 800 fighters, largely concentrated in the mountainous area around Tijantište, near the Montenegro-Serbian border region. It's a relatively isolated part of the country with no military presence, but you can bet it's an ISB stronghold. There was silence on the other end as people on that side of the call muted their lines and talked about the options. General Lancaster realized that none of them were good. General Royal at SOCOM finally came on. "Mr. President, we have a reasonably good idea where Sefer Kubura, the leader of the ISB, is held up. It's his group that's slated to carry out a terrorist attack against our country in less than 48 hours. We also only have 5 days to find out who the Election Day attackers are and when and where they're going to attack. Right now, he's our best bet. We just don't have time to deal with the politics of the situation, Mr. President. If you want us to find out who these attackers are and where they're located, we need to capture the cell leaders and interrogate them as quickly as possible." The President let out a stream of obscenities. "There's no good answer, is there, gentlemen?" he finally asked. "Well, I'm not about to let another terrorist attack happen on my watch." He leaned in so his face would be visible on the teleconference screen. "General Royal, Lancaster, you guys are cleared hot to take these guys down. Do whatever you have to, but capture these men and find out who these attackers are." The President then addressed the directors of the FBI and Homeland Security. "As the military and the CIA uncover names, I want your agents to be carrying out raids and apprehending the suspects. Work your sources here in the States and leave no rock unturned. We have to find these terrorists before they can carry out their next attack. I also want those postal workers charged with interfering with an election, bribery, and any other charges you guys can come up with. We need to build a solid case of how a foreign actor has actively interfered with our election, so we can bring it to the American people once we have all the details. In the meantime, this needs to stay airtight until we have everything ready to go public." The President then shifted in his chair to face the Secretary of State. "I want you to confront the Chinese with the information we have from Wen Zhenyu. Tell them we know about the election fraud they're attempting and their scheme with the postal workers. You tell them we have proof they're behind the terrorist attacks, and that if any further attacks happen against our country, we are going to consider it an act of war." "Yes, Mr. President," Secretary Cagle replied. "I'll relay the information and the threat. What do you want me to say, should they disregard it?" Leaning forward, the President exclaimed, "You tell that conniving SOB Chen I still command the most powerful military in the world. If he wants to escalate our trade war to a full-blown military conflict, then let one more terrorist attack happen in our country. They had better call them off or I'll destroy their economy." Sachs slammed his fist on the table to emphasize his point. Chapter 13. Raider 1, Raider 2. Kosovo. Camp Bondsteel. As he placed the last 30-round magazine in his front pouch, Seth made sure he had everything arranged just the way he wanted it before he put on his individual body armor and began to tighten all the straps in place to fit snugly against his body. He looked around at the other men in the hangar near the helipad. They all had looks of determination written on their faces, as they too got their individual equipment ready. "I can't thank you guys enough for helping my men out," a colonel in the Kosovo police said. He had come to Camp Bondsteel to personally request their help up in Serbica. His police officers were battling an all-out insurrection in the city following the capture of Rajepi. Turning to look at the police colonel who was coming with them, Seth replied, "I'm glad we're able to help, Colonel. Just make sure your officers know when we're coming, and tell them to stay clear until we call them for their help. We're going to move quickly through the village, and we don't want to accidentally end up shooting at each other, okay?" The colonel nodded and held up his cell phone. "I'm in constant contact with the police commander up there. His officers are hunkered down in the police station, waiting for us. They've locked themselves in the building for the time being." Placing a hand on the man's shoulder, Seth added, "We'll sort this out and rescue your men, Colonel. These terrorists aren't going to win." Captain Justin Nicholson walked up and pulled Seth to the side. "You sure you want to come with us?" he asked. "This is going to be a fast, hot, and heavy hit. We have to get ready to make a quick turn for the next mission." Seth smiled at Nicholson. I know, Captain. But you guys are going to need the added help. Besides, I'll help coordinate things with the Colonel here and his men, so your team can focus on rooting out these insurgents. If we can take some prisoners, all the better. The DevGru guys are arriving shortly, and they've got another interrogation team coming along with them. Nicholson nodded. Do you know who's doing the hit in Bosnia and Serbia? From my understanding, it'll be the JSOC boys doing both hits, Seth explained. Unfortunately, we don't have a ranger company here yet, so your ODA team will be acting as the QRF should either group get into trouble. General Lancaster joined them. Okay, you all, enough chit-chat. Get in the choppers and go clean up our mess, he ordered. Ha ha, you just wish you were coming along, Seth replied good-naturedly. Hell no, I'm too old for this crap anymore, Lancaster said with a laugh. But I sure do like watching you guys on my Reaper drones. After a few minutes of final instruction, the 12-man ODA team, along with Seth and the Kosovo police colonel, boarded the 2 Black Hawk helicopters that would fly them 20 minutes away to Srbica, the small city where they had captured Rajepi. His supporters there had surrounded the local police station and killed 5 officers so far. As their helicopters lifted off, so did 2 Apache gunships. They only had a total of 4 of them on Bonsteel, specially flown in from Romania using drop tanks on their wing pylons to get them the extra range needed to fly to Kosovo. The 2 Blackhawks made a quick pass over the city and the Bahram Aliyu Stadium, which was 2 blocks away from the beleaguered police station. As they flew over the area, Seth spotted dozens of individuals surrounding the police station, shooting into it. Captain Nicholson told the pilots, "Set my team down in the stadium. We'll move in on foot from there." The Black Hawk circled back around and landed quickly in the center of the field. In seconds, both groups dismounted the helicopters quickly and began to move forward to advance on the insurgents. Seth tapped the police colonel on the shoulder. "Call ahead to your guys now and let them know we're on the ground and moving to relieve them," he ordered. While they advanced, the colonel made the call. When the group rounded one of the corners onto the main street, they came face to face with a group of 5 insurgents who were standing near a pickup truck, reloading magazines. Without hesitating, the Special Forces soldiers gunned the 5 hostiles down before they even knew what had happened. "Bravo team, take the far side of the street and advance. Alpha team, on me," shouted Captain Nicholson as he moved forward, his rifle at the ready. Turning to the police colonel, Nicholson said, "Stay low and follow me." Seth raised his own M4 to his shoulder and advanced quickly behind Alpha team. They moved maybe halfway down the block before the attackers realized they were under attack. Zip, zip, crack! Bullets slammed into the cars and nearby walls of the buildings as Alpha team advanced. Seth spotted an insurgent manning one of the heavy machine guns and drew a bead on him, pulling the trigger before the man had a chance to get the heavy weapon turned around to shoot at them. Seth's bullet hit the man in the head, dropping him right where he stood. "Cover to the right!" shouted one of the soldiers as they shifted fire to a building on the far side of the street. Several soldiers shot at a figure that had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. More gunfire rang out from a few other buildings as the Special Forces soldiers quickly fanned out and moved in on the insurgents. While the American soldiers advanced on the insurgents, one of the Apache gunships circled overhead, banking hard as it angled its nose down before letting loose a burst of gunfire from its chin gun. Boom! A car in front of the police station exploded, killing several insurgents who had been hiding behind it as they'd peppered the police station with machine gun fire. The second Apache hovered slowly over the police station, the chin gun moving wherever the gunner turned its head as he searched for more targets. Finding one, he let loose a short burst of fire, shredding another insurgent. At this point, the remaining insurgents broke off their attack and tried to do the best they could to slip away. The rest of Captain Nicholson's men continued to advance along the sidewalks of the main road leading up to the police station. When they got near it, they had the police colonel call to his men and let them know they had reached the station. A few minutes later, 6 police officers exited the building as they approached the American soldiers. The police colonel spoke with them for a few minutes and then told several of them to accompany the Special Forces soldiers to check the surrounding area and make sure there were no more insurgents hiding anywhere. It was imperative that they made sure they either killed them all or got them to vacate the area. 20 minutes went by as the police continued to search the surrounding area for any further insurgents. They managed to apprehend 2 of them as they tried to escape down an alleyway. When the police returned, they went to work on collecting the bodies of the dead insurgents and their weapons, while a local fire truck was called over to put out the fire from the car the Apache had blown up. Seth's radio sprang to life. "Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, this is General Lancaster. I'm sending the Blackhawks back to pick you guys up. It looks like the K4 commander in Pristina is finally sending some soldiers over to Serbica. I don't want you guys there when they arrive, so make sure to grab whatever you think is important and get on those helicopters." "Copy that, sir. We'll be on the birds before they get here," Seth replied. He quickly waved down Nicholson and filled him in on the situation. His compatriot agreed that it was time to get out of there. With the sound of the approaching helicopters getting louder, Seth pointed to the 2 prisoners. "Let's take them with us. We can try and find out how many more insurgents are operating in the area and who else is involved." The soldiers nearby nodded. They walked over to the prisoners and zip-tied their hands before placing black hoods on them. Then they marched the detainees over to the football field nearby where the helicopters would land. Once everyone was loaded on the helicopters, they lifted off, not a moment too soon. As they began their ascent into the air, a dozen Italian armored vehicles rolled into the city, headed right for the police station. The Italian soldiers looked up at the Americans as they flew away and shook their fists, but they were out of their grasp. As Seth and his men approached Camp Bonsteel, they saw a small column of military jeeps and lightly armored vehicles lined up at the main gate. "I wonder what that's all about," Seth thought. When the helicopters had landed, Seth took off at a trot to the operations center. He had a bad feeling about the activity at the main gate, and he wanted to find out what was going on. Once Seth entered the building, he immediately spotted General Lancaster on the phone with someone. The general waved for him to join him. "Yes, sir. I'll make sure to tell them. Yes, sir. The SEALs should be landing here shortly. I know. Once they're here, we'll get them saddled up for the mission. I'll call you back." Lancaster hung up the phone and then turned to Seth. "Good job in Serbica," he said. "However, I've got another problem right now that I need your help with." He was clearly frustrated with how things were turning out. "Sure thing, boss," Seth answered. "What's going on?" Lancaster shook his head. "I have to go deal with the K4 commander who's down at the front gate. He's insisting that this base is under his control, and he's ordering us to cease our military operations right now. I need to go tell him that by order of the Secretary of Defense and the President of the United States, that's not happening. Wow, this whole place is turning into a complete goat rope. What the hell is going on?" asked Seth, venting. "One minute the Kosovars are happy that we're here taking these terrorists out of there. The next minute, it seems like the government, along with our NATO partners, is protecting them." General Lancaster ignored the comment. He motioned for Seth to follow him as they walked out of the ops center. "The Delta team is nearly ready to go," he explained. "The SEALs should be arriving momentarily. When they do, I need you to brief them on the Presevo raid. One of the ops planners has the brief ready. I just need you to bring the DevGru guys up to speed on what's going on and who the target is." They heard the roar of the C-17 flying over the base and momentarily looked up. They spotted roughly 4 dozen parachutes descending toward the helipad area of the base. Seth looked at the general. "Is that the SEALs, boss? You had them parachute in?" he asked with a look of disbelief on his face. Lancaster spat on the ground. "The damn government in K4 wouldn't give us permission to land them at the Pristina airport, and none of the neighboring countries would let them land either. I don't have time for them to slip in surreptitiously. I need them on the ground now." He stomped off in the direction of the front gate to go deal with the German K4 commander. Wow, this whole mission is going to crap, Seth thought. What the heck is going on? It was 21:09 hours when Secretary of Defense Charles Chuck McElroy dropped a couple of Alka-Seltzers in his glass of water, waiting for the tablets to dissolve before he could gulp the liquid down. His heartburn was killing him, and he needed to get it under control. Looking up at the video display, he saw it was 03:09 hours local time in Bosnia. The Osprey had just landed in a field near the target location in Tiantishta, near the Montenegro-Serbian border, disgorging its cargo of operators. The ground forces would hike a quick mile to the target location as they sought to maintain their stealth. The Reaper drone circling overhead was providing him with excellent real-time surveillance of the surrounding area, and another screen showed a thermal image of the targeted building, courtesy of a CIA satellite some 60 miles above them. McElroy watched as one group of helicopters dropped off a team of 12 Delta operators. 20 minutes later, his Alka-Seltzer had started to kick in, and he watched as a smaller group of 4 operators rapidly approached the roof of the targeted building from the air. They had haloed in and were quickly closing in on the location that intelligence sources had said housed Sefer Kubura, the leader of the ISB. The Secretary of Defense watched anxiously, barely remembering to breathe. When the soldiers who were parachuting in got close to the roof, they shot the 2 guards there with their silenced rifles, making sure their presence remained undetected. By the time the guards in the building could hear the rotor noise of the Ospreys, the 4 operators who had landed on the roof were readying themselves to breach the building from the top down. The 12-man team that had landed further away and hiked in fanned out into 2 separate groups. One group of 6 approached the targeted house, while the other ground team moved toward the 2 outbuildings nearby. Their Bosnian source had said the outlying buildings were acting as a barracks of sorts, housing as many as 15 armed insurgents. Another computer monitor suddenly came to life. One of the technicians had added the views from the head-mounted cameras the operators were wearing. There was a split screen, and McElroy quickly ascertained which image was from one of the operators on the roof and which was from the team heading toward the same building from the ground level. The Secretary of Defense suddenly heard audio of one of the men, half a world away. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Then he saw a bright flash on the rooftop door. Boom! In seconds, a second flash was soon followed by a short whoomph as a flashbang went off. Then the 4 operators on the roof swiftly burst into the building. McElroy watched as the other 2 groups of operators on the ground almost simultaneously burst through the doors of the remaining buildings on the property. In the span of 3 minutes, the Delta operators had captured Sefer Kubura alive, along with a handful of his lieutenants. Only 4 occupants on the property had been killed in the skirmish, while the other 11 had been captured. With their primary target in custody, the operators began a quick sweep of the buildings for any and all sensitive materials that might help shed some light on their activities. They grabbed laptops, thumb drives, cell phones, maps, journals, and notebooks. Anything and everything of potential value was quickly stuffed into large bags. A few of their other comrades rounded all the prisoners up and held them 50 meters from the buildings while they waited for the Ospreys to head back for the pickup. 10 minutes went by as they waited for their rides to return. When the helicopters landed, the team conducting the SSE of the buildings had collected what they could and made their way out to the landing zone. When the Ospreys landed, the operators threw the prisoners on before piling in with all the captured materials. Secretary of Defense McElroy breathed a huge sigh of relief. A team of specialists would be waiting for the men at Bonsteel to begin ripping the phones, computers, thumb drives, and any other electronic devices. All the data would be uploaded to teams back at the NSA, CIA, and SOCOM for further analysis. McElroy knew that for now, the operators would sit back and count themselves lucky that none of them had been killed or wounded on what was arguably a hastily thrown-together mission with zero preparation, something he knew that they both specialized in doing and absolutely hated being asked to do. As the first mission into Bosnia wound down, the mission into the Presevo Valley was heating up. After some arm-twisting on the part of the President and the Secretary of State, and $60 million in foreign aid, the Serbian government had granted the U.S. permission to carry out the raid in their territory. Surveillance showed they were indeed pulling their MUP forces out of the area, along with any other police and military units, so there would be no chance of a friendly fire situation. All the Serbs had asked was that they be allowed to monitor the raid, which the DoD originally agreed to, but only if they performed their surveillance from the confines of the U.S. Embassy in Belgrade, where the Americans could counter-monitor the Serbian officials. Because this raid was viewed as far more dangerous, an entire SEAL team platoon was being sent in, along with ODA 0311 on standby in a second set of helicopters, accompanied by 2 Apache gunships. McElroy made a comment to those in the room with him. "Well, the first raid went off without a hitch. Let's hope the SEALs have the same luck the Army just had." Bristling a bit at the comment, the Chief Naval Operations puffed his chest out a bit. "I'm sure DevGru will get our man," he said confidently. The SecDef nodded. "I'm sure they will, Admiral. I'm sure they will." He stood. "Excuse me for just a moment," he said as he headed to the restroom. They had less than 30 minutes before the next raid. It was going to be a long evening for the men and women at the Pentagon. As the Delta Force raid re-entered Kosovo airspace, the DevGru raid had just left, crossing over into Serbia and the Presevo Valley. It was now 04:35 hours, still another 2.5 hours until sunrise, plenty of time left to operate in the darkest hours of the day. A second Reaper drone, flown in from an airbase in Romania, had finally come on station, loaded with 4 Hellfire missiles, ready to deliver some aerial support should it be needed. For this raid, the SEALs would be hitting 2 specific targets. The Serbian Security Service was unable to confirm which location Tahir Shikri, the head of the Islamic State of Serbia, was bedding down at. So the SEALs would have to hit 2 locations simultaneously, which was why the entire platoon was going in on the raid. Each team would also have a lone Apache gunship assigned for close-in support, and the Reaper could be vectored in, depending on what additional help was needed. Under normal circumstances, they would have had 2 Apaches for each location, but these aircraft were not commonly deployed to Kosovo, and the other 2 had accompanied the Delta team into Bosnia. While everyone was watching the monitors showing the aircraft heading toward their individual targets, President Sachs snuck into the room and walked over to an empty chair next to the SecDef. As the president approached the table, a few people suddenly noticed him and began to stand before he waved for them to stay seated. Now that all eyes had turned to him, he said, "Please carry on, people. I'm just here to watch like the rest of you." The attention in the room quickly returned to the monitors as they waited for the assault teams to reach their targets. The first assault team swooped in quickly, hovering over the roof of the building they were going to raid. Ropes were thrown out the back end of the Osprey, and 2 strings of operators descended quickly down the ropes. While the first Osprey was landing one group of operators, a second landed less than 100 feet from the building and offloaded the other group. With the Apache circling nearby, the operators moved quickly on the house. Just as it looked like they were going to breach the house before anyone could react, a lone figure appeared in one of the windows and let loose a string of bullets at the group of SEALs who had been rushing the front of the building, forcing many of them to duck for cover, while a few brave operators charged forward, firing their own weapons back at the shooter. The Osprey hovering over the building disconnected their ropes now that they had offloaded their assault team, and immediately applied power to the engines as they fought to gain as much altitude as possible to get out of the kill zone. Suddenly, 4 figures appeared out of a small building not more than 200 feet away and opened fire on the Osprey with AK-74s. Then a lone figure appeared on the roof of a building several doors down and fired off an RPG at the Osprey. The pilot deftly banked to the left, allowing the RPG to sail right underneath their right engine, just missing them. Suddenly, a second guy appeared practically beneath them and fired off another RPG round. With almost no warning, the pilot had no way to avoid this new attack, and the second RPG slammed into the belly of the aircraft. The warhead exploded up into the cargo bay and the Osprey slid sideways in the air for a moment before it began to lose altitude and summarily crashed into the side of a single-story house, practically on the main street of the small town. The Apache gunship flew in and quickly lit up the building where the man had just fired the RPG with its 30mm chain gun. The gunner then turned the chin gun on the other group of shooters who had fired off the first RPG and lit up that building as well. While all of this was happening, the breach team that had come in from the roof met heavy resistance inside the building. The men and women in the Pentagon Operations Center nervously watched one of the head cameras from the breach team as they rapidly moved from room to room, looking for the high-value individual they had been sent in to capture. Suddenly, the screen whited out from an explosion. The second breach team, which was charging up the front of the building, made it to the front entrance when a machine gunner opened fire on them from across the street. Several of the SEALs went down from the fusillade of bullets before the Apache gunner was able to swing his chin gun around and rake the building with 30mm rounds, shredding the structure and anyone inside it. "It's a damn trap!" shouted a Navy captain in the Pentagon Ops Center. He slammed his fist down on the table, causing everyone in the room to jump. "What the hell's going on, Chuck?" asked the president, who was anxiously watching as several of the operators dragged some of their wounded brothers behind a couple of vehicles parked in front of the building. "Hang on, Mr. President, we're trying to figure that out," replied the SecDef. He gave a nervous glance to a couple of his generals. This assault mission had gone from a quick snatch and grab to a rescue mission in the span of 60 seconds. One of the generals quickly picked up his telephone and ordered General Lancaster to send in the ODA team they had on standby. While the call for reinforcements was being made, the remaining SEALs on the ground continued to try and execute the mission. They finished clearing the house, but failed to find the high-value individual they had been sent in to grab. With the mission an official bust, they now did their best to collect up their wounded and secure a perimeter until their QRF could arrive and get them out of there. Several of the SEALs took off toward the downed Osprey to check on the crew. Fortunately, no one had been killed in the crash or by the RPG. The two crew chiefs and one of the pilots had been injured. The SEALs quickly collected them up and made their way back to where they had the rest of their wounded comrades. Several of the medics started working on stabilizing the wounded while they waited for their rescue helicopters to come fetch them. Meanwhile, the Apache continued to make several low passes over the area, giving anyone else who wanted to attack the Americans pause. "We still have the other assault group heading to their target," explained one of the Army colonels hopefully. "They should be over the objective in minutes." Everyone turned their eyes to the second assault group as it prepared to hit its target. Before the two Ospreys flew in to drop the next team off, the Apache made a slow circle over the farmhouse, scanning the area for possible threats. The gunner saw something suspicious near one of the outlying buildings on the farm and opened fire, shredding the building. In the blink of an eye, a heavy machine gun opened fire on the Apache from the nearby forest, hitting the helicopter with a string of heavy-caliber machine gun rounds. Fortunately, the Apache was a heavily armored attack helicopter, and the rounds harmlessly bounced off. At this point, the two Ospreys changed course and moved to gain more altitude and let the Apache do its thing. While the gunship was circling back around for a better angle to attack the tree line, it let loose two anti-material rockets at the heavy machine gun position to silence it. Just then, the helicopter suddenly spat out flares as its emergency evasive systems took over. A fraction of a second later, a surface-to-air missile from a man-portable air defense system streaked out of a nearby copse of trees. The man-pad had been fired from less than 1,000 feet away, leaving little time or opportunity for the flares to cause the seeker head to lock onto them before the missile slammed into the right engine of the Apache. The gunship's engine started spitting out flames and smoke. The helicopter veered to the right, streaking smoke as it drifted away from the trees and the farmhouse. The pilot would now have to do his best to limp the helicopter back to Camp Bonsteel and hope he didn't have to make an emergency landing. "What the hell is going on?" demanded the SecDef as he stood up, looking at the general and colonel sitting at the table. "Clearly, someone tipped these guys off that we were coming, because there's no way they could have known we were hitting both locations." Still fuming, he turned to one of the colonels, who was holding a phone receiver to his shoulder. "Order the other team to abort. Tell them to head over to the other objective and work to pick up our wounded. Order the Reaper to light that farmhouse up, along with the surrounding area. If our target is still there, then I want him dead. If not, then I want the rest of those hostiles dead." A minute went by, and then they saw several missiles streak in and blow the entire farmhouse apart, along with the lone outbuilding and several spots in the tree line where the man-pad had been launched. The two Ospreys that had been holding back at a higher altitude until the gunship made sure the area was clear headed toward the other objective 10 minutes away to help pick up their wounded comrades from the other team. The president looked at the generals around the table and asked the obvious question. "How did we not know about this ambush? Why didn't our surveillance pick up these guys in the tree line?" The lone rep from the National Reconnaissance Office, or NRO, leaned forward as he replied, "They must have been tipped off. As to why we didn't pick them up on the satellites, they could have used a thermal blanket and just waited under it until our helicopter was in range. A thermal blanket is relatively cheap tech these days." The president shook his head. "That's not good enough, people. I want answers on who leaked the raid information and how this terrorist group knew exactly when and where we were going to attack. Someone on the Serbian side must have tipped them off. Figure out who knew what when and what the heck is going on," he ordered. Turning to look at the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the President added, "I'd like to talk to both of you separately. We need to go over something in private." The two looked at each other and then back at the President. "Yes, Mr. President," said the SecDef. "We can walk up to my office." He motioned for the other two men to follow him. The three of them exited the ops center, leaving the rest of the staff to handle the recovery and the rest of the mission on their own. When they left the ops center, the Attorney General and the Director for Homeland Security were both waiting for them in the hallway. The SecDef and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs were caught off guard, but quickly regained their composure. Turning to look at the President as the five of them now walked down the hallway toward his office, McElroy asked, "Something big is going on, isn't it?" The President just nodded, not saying a word as they walked down the hall. Then he turned to look at the SecDef. "It's best we wait to get into your office before we speak, but yes, something big is going on." The rest of the walk was shrouded in silence as the group made their way through the maze of hallways to reach the SecDef's office. When they walked in, Chuck noticed it was 22:47 hours, an hour and 13 minutes until midnight. When everyone was in the office, the President asked the Secret Service agents to stay outside and to make sure no one disturbed them unless it was absolutely urgent. With the room now secured and all five of them seated, Sachs leveled with the SecDef. "Chuck, I've got some bad news about the election and everything that's been going on," he began. He had a nervous and uncertain look on his face. Holding a hand up before the President could say anything else, the SecDef said, "If you're telling me it looks like we may lose, I wouldn't count yourself out yet. The polls were wrong last time." The President shook his head. "It's not that, Chuck. I'm going to lose. It's not even about the polls this time." Sachs sighed, then turned to the Attorney General, Malcolm Wright. "Why don't you tell them what we know up to this point? The sooner Chuck knows, the sooner he can help us figure out what to do next." Malcolm nodded. "We've uncovered a very sophisticated plot to subvert the election," he said. "Oh my God, you have to be kidding me," said the SecDef, flabbergasted. "How bad is it?" "It's bad, Chuck," Malcolm said. He stood up and paced behind his chair for a second. "Several weeks ago, we uncovered what we thought was a couple of postal workers who had been bribed to intercept absentee ballots from being delivered to the post office during their daily mail routes." "What? How the heck is that possible?" Chuck asked angrily. With this national ID card and iVote, the election was supposed to be infallible, he thought. So much for securing the election. "It's complicated, Chuck, but I'll do my best to break it down in layman's terms. At first, we thought it was just a couple of bad apples, a few rogue postal workers. Unfortunately, the more we dug, the more we found. As of this morning, we've arrested 43 postal workers involved in the scheme. There could be more, but those are the ones we've discovered up to this point. The SecDef held up his hand. Wait, can't the election offices just send out new ballots to the individuals who requested them, and just have the people recast their vote? There must be a mechanism that allows for something like that to happen. Sighing before he replied, Malcolm explained. Unfortunately, that's not possible. For one, the Election Commission in each affected area would have to resend absentee and mail-in ballots to everyone in the affected districts. Second, there just isn't enough time to send out new ballots to everyone and allow people to review and return them before Election Day. We're less than 4 days away at this point. Also, even if the new ballots were sent out, they'd have no way of being able to distinguish between whose ballot had already been received and counted and whose hadn't counted. We could have tens of thousands of people casting more than one ballot. This must be some sort of mistake, McElroy insisted. How many ballots could these postal workers have intercepted anyway? Maybe it's not enough to affect the outcome of the election. No, this isn't a mistake or some sick joke, Malcolm insisted. From the number of people the FBI have caught up to this point and the amount of money that has been identified as part of this scheme, it would appear these postal workers were able to intercept more than 192,000 votes in 5 states, enough to swing the outcome of the election in Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Texas. Malcolm hung his head low. This is just what we know right now, he said in a very depressed tone. This scheme could be going on in other states as well. I've got the FBI looking at every postal worker in the country right now, but there just isn't time to uncover every possible angle before the election. He slumped back down into his chair with the look of despair and angst on his face. There was a short pause as Chuck and General Austin Peterson, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, digested what they had just been told. Finally, the general asked, "How do we know these intercepted votes won't help you, Mr. President? I mean no disrespect, but perhaps this is being done to advance you." "We thought about that as well," responded Patricia Hogan, the DHS secretary. "However, the districts these votes were stolen from were districts that have traditionally voted Democratic by a 2-to-1 margin. The specific postal workers that were involved in this scheme targeted nursing homes, retirement communities, and assisted living facilities in these districts. Without fail, these specific groups have traditionally voted Republican by a wide margin. Not enough to tip the balance in their districts, but enough to keep the races there from being a complete defeat." She leaned forward as she continued to explain. "The consensus at my department is that these facilities were targeted as a means of suppressing the Republican vote in these districts. If 30,000 fewer people voted Republican in one of these districts, it wouldn't be as easily noticed, because these districts already vote 2-to-1 against the Republicans regardless. So if that margin were to increase to 3-to-1, it wouldn't necessarily raise any red flags. However, it would be just enough difference in the margin that it could shift the balance of the state, effectively changing the results in these states from closely voting conservative to just barely voting Democratic." Jumping back into the conversation, Malcolm added, "When we reviewed the interrogation of Wen Zhenyu and reinterrogated a handful of the postal workers, we put 2 and 2 together and discovered that Wen was one of the key money guys supporting this effort. One of the postal workers in North Carolina told us she was dating a fellow by the name of Michael Wang, and that he was the guy who approached her about the scheme. When the FBI raided his workplace and arrested him, he eventually spilled the beans. He said he had been approached by some men who said if he didn't cooperate with them, his grandparents, who still live in China, along with his extended family, would be thrown in jail or possibly killed. During his interrogation, he told us he was directed to set up several business checking accounts for a couple of companies in each of the states where the scheme was happening. He was then contacted by Wen Zhenyu, who said he'd start sending money through an offshore account to be placed into each of these shell corporations he had been directed to set up. Once we had Mr. Wang's side of the story, we pressed Wen about it. He not only confirmed the information but revealed a greater plan to rig the election. So as you can see, this is a much larger conspiracy than we first thought. We have actual, verifiable proof of at least one foreign power having successfully interfered in our election to engineer an outcome of their choosing. Turning back to look at his Secretary of Defense, the President said, "That brings us back to what's going on in the Balkans. This Wen Zhenyu appears to be the main money guy. We know he has supported this voter scheme here in the States and financially supported the terrorist groups that carried out the October 24th attacks. He's also given money to help carry out the Halloween attacks tomorrow and the Election Day attacks if our people aren't able to stop them." Shaking his head in disgust, Chuck added, "To what end, though? And why? What is the end state of all this involvement? Surely they must have known that at some point we'd find out." The President snorted. "To change administrations, Chuck. I mean, peel the onion back. The CIA analysts looking at Wen's computers and electronic data were able to trace that Gmail and White House email hack back in 2018 to the Ministry of State Security. They were trying to figure out if we were going to impose new trade tariffs on them and label them a currency manipulator. They wanted our playbook for what we were going to do to them economically, so they could anticipate our moves and have counter-moves ready and in place. When they saw the severity of what we were going to impose, they opted to take a more direct approach in manipulating our democracy. What better way to control the trade policies to their choosing than to steal the election outright?" "This is crap! What are we doing about this?" Chuck demanded angrily as he looked at the four of them for answers. "There isn't much we can do, Chuck," said Malcolm. "We know what's happening, but what are we supposed to do? Hold a press conference and lay all the cards on the table? If we do that, we'll be accused of trying to rig the election a couple of days before it's supposed to be held. The Democrats and the media will go absolutely nuts, and who can blame them? They'll say we engineered this, that we allowed the terrorist attacks to happen, that we were incompetent in protecting the nation." "It's a perfect storm, Chuck," said the President. "We're in a total catch-22 here. If we stay silent, we know Senator Tate is going to win because everything's been engineered for him to do so. If we bring all this information forward, then we'll be accused of attempting to rig the election. If we win, they'll say we manipulated the voters at the last minute. And if we lose, they'll say it was a repudiation of our attempt to lay blame for the loss on the Chinese and Islamic extremists. It's the ultimate lose-lose position." It was apparent from his expression that Sachs felt completely helpless. "We can't allow this to happen, Mr. President," the SecDef insisted. "We can't allow the country to be manipulated like this." He wasn't happy with the President's response up to this point. The President let out a deep sigh. "What would you have me do, Chuck? This has the potential to completely split the country apart. I mean, look what's happening already, from the weaponization of the October 24th attacks on social media. Shoot, half the country doesn't even think it was Islamic extremists. They believe the narratives that were being pushed out on social media, that these were attacks carried out by Antifa, white nationalists, or Black Lives Matters. You and I know that's garbage, and we've put that out in multiple press conferences and briefings refuting it. There's just been so much sketchy news pumped out the last 4 years that no one's listening anymore to what's really going on." Shaking his head, the President added, I don't want to go down as the last American president, Chuck. Standing up, Chuck walked over to look out the window of his office. He needed to think for a moment. Surveying the Capitol across the Potomac, he shook his head in disgust. We're not going to lose this country over this, he resolved. We have to figure something out. Turning to look back at the president, Chuck saw the 4 others were watching him, waiting to see what he'd say next. He didn't hold back with his response. I don't accept that, Mr. President. We're bigger than this. We have to stop this from happening. What do you want us to do, Chuck? Hold a press conference and tell the world what's happening? Malcolm retorted. They won't believe us. Even if we show them the evidence, half the country still won't believe it. We can postpone the election, Chuck asserted. He quickly held a hand up to stop them from interrupting him. Let me finish my thought. Look, we've already made the blockchain voting an option for people. Heck, it looks like 35% of the electorate has opted to use the iVote app. What if we brought our findings to the American people, and then, as a consequence of what we've discovered, we postponed the election for 60 days to allow people ample time to register to vote using the iVote app. That way, those who aren't able to use the app have time to request a poll worker to help them with it, or to be allowed to vote via a new absentee ballot that is immediately scanned into the voting machine, so there's no chance for fraud. The president surveyed the faces around him. Secretary McElroy could see that the AG and the DHS secretary were still mulling the idea over. After a moment, Malcolm cleared his throat. Mr. President, I'm not sure if Chuck's plan could work, but with the pending terrorist attacks that we know are going to take place, we could use that as a justification to postpone the election. We can then present the case of voter fraud and void all absentee and mail-in ballots. We could announce that people either have to physically come to a polling station to vote or use the iVote app. Exceptions could be made for those who are homebound and unable to use the app or come to a polling station. But we'd have to really limit the exceptions and then go out of our way to make sure a polling worker was able to accommodate those who needed it. The AG paused. We're going to get accused of interfering in the election if we try to make the American people aware of what's going on. We have to accept that fact. However, if we don't do anything, if we stay silent, then we have to accept that not only are we going to lose, but a foreign power would have succeeded in manipulating our election. If we allow that to stand, Mr. President, we may never know if our future elections will ever be free and fair. It'll be a permanent smear on our nation, and worse, if word ever gets out that we knew about this and did nothing, it may tear the country apart. It may tear the country apart as it is, Malcolm, said the president. He sighed. No, the country is going to fall apart if we do this. He then turned to look at Austin Peterson, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. General, if we move forward with this plan and bring this to the people's attention, there is going to be some serious civil disturbance. Worse, things may start to fall apart. How will the military feel about this? Whose side will they come down on? He asked. It's not about whose side the military will come down on, Mr. President, General Peterson answered. Each and every one of us has sworn an oath to the Constitution to protect it against both foreign and domestic enemies. What I see from what's been shared with me up to this point is a clear attack on our democracy. Foreign actors have purposely tried to usurp our government and install a candidate of their choosing, not the American people's. That is the problem. When couched that way, I believe the officers and soldiers under my command will adhere to the authority of the duly elected president. Right now, that's you. If the election were held and a new leader were elected, then the military would fall under that new authority. If you present the information to the people the same way you presented it to me, I think the voters will decide for themselves what to believe. If they still choose to vote for the other guy, well, then you'll have done the right thing, and they will have won fair and square, and the military will back you up on that." Austin had been fairly silent during the past hour, so McElroy felt it was good to get his perspective on the situation. Lifting his head up, the president turned to Malcolm and Patty. "Okay, we'll let the American people know what we know, and let the chips fall where they may. In the meantime, General, I need you to work with the AG and DHS on preventing these terrorist attacks from happening. If I need to sign some sort of executive order to make it rain, then please tell me what you need. We have to stop these attacks." The next hour was spent going over what specific laws needed to be suspended and for how long. Once the NSA was able to identify and locate the terrorist cells still in hiding, the Joint Special Operations Command would unleash the entire wrath of the U.S. military on them.
Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss another video.
In the meantime, we have plenty of reading material to keep you busy. You can find it all on our website, frontlinepublishinginc.com.